this morning. Now
time for a BBC
This is Geeta Guru-Murthy live in Downing Street for BBC News, BBC World and BBC One viewers who are just joining us. Chris Mason, the BBC political editor, has confirmed that Boris Johnson is going to step down. We expect a statement from the Prime Minister today. He will serve as Prime Minister until a successor is elected in the autumn, if the Conservative Party members, of course, and the MPs allow him to stay on until the autumn. Of course, there needs to be now a Conservative Party election for the new leader. It's expected there will be a very big field. We saw a letter from Nadhim Zahawi published on Twitter today calling for the Prime Minister to step down. Boris Johnson has seen the scale of opposition against him and he has now agreed to resign. Well, of course, it had been incredibly febrile in the last 24 hours and it was clear that this was only moving in one direction. That came after a very senior Foreign Office official contradicted the Prime Minister, saying effectively he had been dishonest about a very serious sexual assault allegation against a member of the Prime Minister's government. That whole scandal was just the latest in a stream of scandals that has dogged the Prime Minister after Partygate. Criticism about his own sense of honesty and integrity, the heart of the criticism about his character, something that even his allies accepted couldn't be fixed by new policy announcements, arguments over tax, arguments about how to address the very urgent questions on the cost of living that are only set to escalate in the next few months, and a real sense of policy drift with the Conservative government as Boris Johnson has been buffeted over and over again by crises seem to be of his own making. Well, of course, we have had a stream of resignations, over 50, 54, 55 resignations or more, and of course we've also had the interventions today from Nadhim Zahawi, who has described himself as a friend of 30 years, saying that he privately counselled the Prime Minister to step down yesterday, but today has gone public with that call, and Michelle Donnellan, the Education Minister, newly appointed only yesterday, again resigning. It looks chaotic. Critics of the Conservative Party in the opposition, of course, say that the whole party, the whole Tory party, has been corrupted by what is going on by the leadership of Boris Johnson. We're expecting, though, now the Prime Minister to come out at some point here in Downing Street and make a statement. It's been reported, but he can't confirm it, that the Prime Minister spoke to Graham Brady, who is the chairman of the 1922 Backbench Committee, and confirmed that he had pondered events and realised basically that the game was up. And that became apparent because with the stream of resignations, the stream of withdrawal of support from the backbenchers, it was clear that Boris Johnson basically did not have the confidence of his own party. And although we don't have a written constitution, no Prime Minister can stay in office when they cannot get the full backing of their party because they can't get the backing of Parliament. We also heard a number of criticisms from former ministers today saying they feared this was a Trump-style challenge to the Constitution, someone trying to stay in office beyond the time that they had any legitimacy to do so. Those are very, very serious charges. Some people even questioning whether Boris Johnson's judgment was completely sound, given the fact that he had not seen the scale of opposition and stepped down already. Well, it seems that today, this morning, that moment has finally come. This is the man, of course, who delivered Brexit for this country, came into power under extraordinary circumstances. Brexit is still a very divisive question. The cost of living, the war in Ukraine, the pandemic have all been huge issues for Boris Johnson to deal with. There's been a lot of controversy around many of his judgments, even on some of those very, very big questions. Of course, as part of Brexit, the Northern Ireland question, the Northern Ireland Protocol, the breaking of international law, the alienating of EU allies on the latest manoeuvres around the protocol has been another area that's been very, very fractious. What happens to all that now will, of course, rest on who takes over the Conservative Party. The party had been split by the Remain Brexit factions. We do not know ultimately who is going to take over, whether it's going to be someone from either of those wings, whether that is still a key concern, whether in fact it would be someone like Jeremy Hunt who's not served, or Tom Tugendhat who's not served as a cabinet minister, or whether it will be one of the big names in the government who has actually been part of the Boris Johnson administration, whether that is seen as an advantage or whether that's seen as a problem. Well, let's just try and work out what this big change that we're going to see in Downing Street now means for Northern Ireland, for the whole integrity, of course, of the United Kingdom. Chris Page, our Ireland correspondent, is with me. Chris, just tell us, what is your sense, first of all, of the breaking news that Boris Johnson is now going to resign as Prime Minister?
Well, here in Belfast, it's fair to say that very few, if any, politicians, be they unionist, nationalist or neither, were great fans of Boris Johnson. He'd been strongly criticised really by all sides here. So his resignation will certainly be openly welcomed by nationalists and the likes of the Cross Community Alliance Party, who'd been very critical of him, and in particular his support for Brexit right from the very start. But the bigger question, I think, will be around the very future of devolution in this part of the United Kingdom. We're in the middle of a homegrown, if you like, political crisis at the moment. Northern Ireland hasn't had a fully functioning devolved government since February, when the Democratic Unionist Party, in effect, walked out of the power-sharing executive at Stormont in protest at the Brexit trading arrangement. So that arrangement is called the Northern Ireland Protocol. It was agreed by Boris Johnson and Brussels in the run-up to the UK's formal exit from the European Union. And it, in effect, places a trade border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. So Northern Ireland has basically remained in the EU's single market for goods, continuing to follow EU rules. And that means plenty of goods, particularly foods, when they come from Britain to Northern Ireland, well, they are checked on arrival in Northern Ireland. So to unionists, that is a border within their own country, an internal trade barrier within the United Kingdom, and something that threatens Northern Ireland's place in the Union. So the Democratic Unionist Party is basically vetoing the formation of a devolved government. It's even stopping the devolved assembly at Stormont from sitting at all until they say that trade border is removed. Now, Boris Johnson and the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss had been pushing through the House of Commons that would unilaterally remove a number of those checks and in theory pave the way for the DUP to return to power sharing, and therefore Northern Ireland would get its devolved government back. But the question is, will a new Prime Minister continue on that trajectory, which certainly is damaging, for example, relations with Dublin? The Irish government say the legislation is in breach of international law. Or will a new Prime Minister take a more moderate line in the protocol, go along with those critics that says it breaches international law, and therefore chart out a whole different path that will be the protocol? And so certainly what's happening in Downing Street isn't bringing a resolution to the crisis here any closer. It may be making it a lot more complicated.
Okay, Chris Page, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, we're here in Downing Street with the breaking news that Boris Johnson is now going to resign as Prime Minister after facing a huge internal revolt. Let's go to our correspondent John Maguire, who is on College Green. He's got Steve Baker with him.
Yes, just really gauging reaction as it comes through. It's been an eventful morning, an eventful last 48 hours, you could say, an eventful last couple of years in government for Boris Johnson. Steve Baker, the news is just coming through that he will resign. Your reaction?
Well, I'm filled with sorrow about it. I wanted Boris Johnson to be an absolutely roaring success. That was my hope and expectation. So it fills me with sorrow that it's come to this, but I think it's absolutely the right decision. I will certainly always remember that Boris got us out of a terrible constitutional crisis beat Jeremy Corbyn, far left, could have been a disaster for our country, and got a great future relationship. Just need to sort out the Northern Ireland Protocol. But overall, I think, thank goodness now we can, remember Boris saved this country from a really massive crisis, and thank goodness he's now agreed in the circumstances it's right to go.
Who knows what his legacy might be, but where did it all go so horribly wrong over the last weeks and months?
It's very, very clear to me this has been about the handling, ultimately, of the Chris Pincher affair. That's the moment that has crystallised in ministers' minds that they couldn't support the government. And it's perfectly plain. It's not been about policy. This hasn't been about people like me who are free marketeers not liking what he was doing. That's never been... We all accepted he was, as he put it, a Brexity Heseltine, lots of intervention, but out of the EU. So accepted that, perhaps with a bit of disappointment, but accepted it. And what's happened is ministers have seen... Well, they've referred to a lack of honesty and integrity, and we clearly can't have that. And it's much better the PM goes now than dragging on to the Privileges Committee, potentially finding that he'd knowingly misled the House, because that would have been a disaster too. So,
what's the mood been like amongst?
Despair.
Right.
And people haven't... I've been through a lot, 7 years of being in the centre of things, and I've never seen colleagues in a deeper sense of despair than they have been in the last 24 hours. Because people have been enthusiastically supporting Boris, and they have wanted to rescue him from the situation he's been in, and of course they'll be bitterly disappointed. What we've got to do again is bring ourselves together, remember that we collectively are the leaders of our country, whether people like it or not. We've got a majority in Parliament, we've got to behave with integrity and openness, not talk to our opponents but talk to the public, because the mums and dads and the people of this country watching this programme deserve to be well governed by people with integrity, and we've just got to give that to them.
And did it therefore become too much of a circus? Were there too many distractions? Was the daily worker government, the cost of living crisis, war in Ukraine or whatever, was that starting to suffer?
I think it has to be admitted that yes, of course it has suffered. But let's be realistic, the last 24 hours did become a circus. You can't govern if you've got ministers resigning in a great avalanche. That thankfully now will come to an end. Ben Wallace was right to say that he needed to stay in post as Defence Secretary. I'm glad he said that. We now need to get just stable, have a policy of continuity, have a leadership contest which will happen very quickly, and then in September when we come back, fresh start, and get to a position where we win the next election because we deserve to win. I believe we can be in that position. We have got to deliver it though with a great imperative.
Has the brand been damaged too much by what's happened over recent months?
The Conservative Party endures. The Conservative Party endures. It's one of the two great parties of government of this country. I believe in the Conservative Party. I've long believed we needed to shift emphasis, but it's a broad church, a broad family. And I believe the people of this country are basically Tories, even if sometimes they vote Labour. And I respect the people of this country, and I want to see them given good government. So I do believe in the Conservative Party. I think we should make no mistake that the next government will either be Labour-led, probably with the SNP, or Conservative-led. And it really should be an outright Conservative majority delivering on this direction of travel for our country, which people have approved of resoundingly. And we just need to put smiles on our faces now, lift ourselves up, stand tall, and get on and deliver in a responsible way.
There's only now 2 weeks until parliamentary recess, until you take your summer break. Just talk us through those 2 weeks. Is that enough time to get two candidates, and who should those candidates be?
So that now clearly is enough time to get down to two candidates to put to the Conservative Party membership. It would have been even trickier if the Prime Minister had needed removing, but now he's going. I'm very, very confident we will whittle down candidates to two by the end of the parliamentary term. That is just to that's to let MPs get back to their constituencies and serve the public in that way. But we can do it in 2 weeks. It'll be frantic. I'm afraid many of you are going to be out here on the green for 2 weeks. Some of us are going to have to live on adrenaline for 2 weeks, but we'll do it.
Have you already had phone calls? Have you already either offered your services to someone? Will you tell us who that is, and have they rung you?
Well, people will know that from in the last 7 of the 12 years I've been in Parliament, I have provided leadership and organisation through really massive crises, whether it's been Brexit or COVID, race relations, net zero. So of course I've taken a lot of calls and meetings with potential leaders. And now I'm seriously thinking whether I should do it, because, I got into politics because I thought I wanted an MP I always agreed with. Well, maybe I'd like a Prime Minister that could be counted on to do what I thought best. So I know what I'm looking for: fierce resolve, humility, integrity, a willingness to do what's actually right for the long and short term of this country, And so, of course, I'm seriously considering standing, because Conservative Home members consistently put me in their top 10. So I should respect them and take that seriously.
And have you already formed your team? Or how sort of far along are you in your preparations?
I form teams very, very quickly. I am involved with a team around me, and we will see how things evolve.
What sort of level of support do you need, do you think, to get into that last two?
Realistically, to be in the last two, a Member of Parliament should aim to get the maximum amount of support, because if you're only on a small proportion, then we'll see what happens. There's an enormous pressure to stand down. But, you know, were I to be in the last two, with a quarter of MPs, I would absolutely go to the membership. The membership have got to be engaged in this process. But, you know, if I was there, quarter of MPs, telling me, oh, it's only a quarter, and I'd say, actually, what we need to do, get the backing of the members, lead the country properly, and everybody come together.
And what do you think will be the main points that you will be talking about if you're successful, if you are one of those last two? What are going to be the main messages that you think will convince your parliamentary colleagues that you're the man for the job?
The first point is to deliver on this mandate and this manifesto. We have tortured the public for 7 years with high drama politics in a seemingly continuous series of crises. So it's time to just have stability, deliver this manifesto with this mandate, run for about the 2 years, then have a general election which we can deserve to win. Deal with the cost of living crisis. So this mandate, this manifesto. Beyond that, we've got to look really seriously at who we want to be. I think the public, I'm certain the British public, can rise to the challenge of the moment. We have got to deal with the economy, with energy policy. We've got to make sure that the people of this country are ever more prosperous, happy and free. The only way to get there is Conservative policies. I'd be a true blue Conservative, but one who's modern, much more relational, open.
So focus back on policy, focus back on constituencies.
I'd like to get politics out of people's lives. Our lives at the moment are blighted by politically motivated campaigns with all sorts of nonsense. I mean, this used to be a tolerant country where people could agree to disagree and go their own way in peace. Now you get cancelled and shut down. That sort of things must end. But the thing that's going to be most pressing in everyone's lives is the economy and their livelihoods. That means lowering taxes. We've just got to get taxes down from this historic high.
Okay, Steve Baker, thank you very much indeed for your time. So an early indication then that at least one person will be throwing their hat into the ring. I think Suella, we've also heard from Suella Braverman as well, who said that she would very much like to be considered to be Boris Johnson's successor. At the time she said that, of course, we didn't know that there was necessarily a successor required. We do know that, and as we've heard, they only have 2 weeks now for Conservative MPs for the party to try to elect a new leader before the summer recess, somebody who will succeed Boris Johnson and who will take over at number 10. Back to you.
John Maguire, thanks very much indeed there. John Maguire with Steve Baker confirming his interest in standing for the leadership. I'm joined by Nick Eardley, who's going to join me in a moment. I just want to bring you the reaction from the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer, who said on Twitter that the Conservatives have overseen 12 years of economic stagnation, declining public services and empty promises. We don't need to change the Tory at the top. We need a proper change of government. We need a fresh start for Britain. He says it is good news for the country that Boris Johnson has resigned as Prime Minister, but it should have happened long ago. He was always unfit for office. He's been responsible for lies, scandal and fraud on an industrial scale, and all those who have been complicit should be utterly ashamed. He goes on, the Tory party have inflicted chaos upon the country during the worst cost of living crisis in decades, and they cannot now pretend that they're the ones to sort it out. They've been in power for 12 years. The damage they have done is profound. Economic stagnation, declining public services, empty promises. Enough is enough. We don't need to change the Tory at the top. We need a proper change of government. Well, Nick Eardley is with me now. Nick, just to confirm where we are, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, has confirmed he is going to stand down.
Boris Johnson in the next few hours will tell us all that he is resigning and making way for a Conservative leadership contest. He plans to stay as Prime Minister while that contest happens, although my phone's been buzzing already with Conservative MPs saying they think that Boris Johnson needs to go now because of the level of bad blood and after everything that happened over the past 48 hours. Boris Johnson's been pushed over the edge. Last night he wanted to stay. He was planning a reshuffle. He wanted to put more people into those senior government roles that were vacant, but he's been pushed over the edge this morning by Nadhim Zahawi, the new Chancellor, a man in post for just over a day, saying that he's changed his mind, he thinks the PM needs to go. Michelle Donnellan, the Education Secretary, for just over a day, saying that she'd resigned and she thinks he needs to go. Boris Johnson did not make this choice. He's been forced out of office in, the most remarkable circumstances. The writing to many people was on the wall when Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid walked out on Tuesday. Boris Johnson has done everything he can to try and cling on, but now it's game over. He is going to resign or announce his resignation in the next few hours.
And just to remind people, this has been triggered by a sexual assault allegation with Chris Pincher. The account that Downing Street gave started to unravel. A senior Foreign Office official basically said the Prime Minister had, again, not been truthful. And that question of the Prime Minister's integrity has been at the heart of the weekly, daily criticism.
I think that's why this position was untenable for the Prime Minister, because it wasn't like he could just change a policy. It wasn't like he could just tweak a few of his ideas to win his MPs over. This was about him, and it had reached a point where his party had turned en masse and decided he wasn't going to change his behaviour. So yes, the Chris Pincher row has been a huge one. Chris Pincher, of course, resigned as Deputy Chief Whip last week. Boris Johnson denied that he knew about any allegations against him, or his team denied that he knew about any allegations against Mr Pincher, until their story gradually unravelled. But it's more than that, Geeta. It's the by-election losses a few weeks ago. It's the resignation of Lord Geidt. It's Partygate. It's all of these things.
Owen Paterson, yeah.
Owen Paterson. All of these things have had a cumulative effect on the Prime Minister's authority, on his standing in his own party, and the Chris Pincher row has been one that was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Nick, just stay with us, because Nicola Sturgeon has also tweeted just to say there will be a widespread sense of relief that the chaos of the last few days, indeed months, will come to an end. The notion of Boris Johnson staying on as Prime Minister until autumn seems far from ideal and surely not sustainable. She says Boris Johnson was always manifestly unfit to be Prime Minister, and the Tories should never have elected him leader or sustained him in office for as long as they have. But the problems run much deeper than one individual. The Westminster system is broken. For the democratic deficit inherent in the Westminster government doesn't get fixed with a change of government. None of the alternative Tory PMs would ever be elected in Scotland, and in policy terms it's hard to see what real difference hard Brexit supporting Labour offers. That is from Nicola Sturgeon, so another sense of the reaction of relief, but of course a lot of criticism, as you would expect from the opposition, about all the potential Conservative alternatives. Now, there are going to be a huge number of runners and riders from within the cabinet, but they are all complicit in every decision that Boris Johnson has made. They have backed him until now, almost all of them. The question is how damaging that is, whether he has corrupted the Tory party, as the opposition say, or whether, with this huge mandate that the Conservatives have, this can be a fresh start to bring some stability.
I want to read what one Tory MP, a grandee, said to me this morning. This is going to divide the party dramatically. There were warnings on the record yesterday from the Prime Minister's allies, Conor Burns, who's a Northern Ireland minister. He was saying that this is going to be a bloodbath, that, there are so many different views on what the Tory party should do next that it's going to be extremely damaging. I have a pretty long list of people who I think might stand to be the next Tory leader. Well, it's really interesting because they're from different wings of the party. Potentials, none of these are, or not all of them are confirmed yet, but a lot of them I think will stand. Rishi Sunak, Sajid Javid, Jeremy Hunt, Tom Tugendhat, Suella Braverman, Steve Baker. The last two are really keen Brexiteers. Rishi Sunak's a really keen Brexiteer. Jeremy Hunt, Tom Tugendhat and Sajid Javid are from the One Nation group of Tory MPs who are more to the centre, and a lot of them were sceptical about Brexit. There's Rishi Sunak this morning leaving his house. The big question he's going to face over the next few hours is whether he wants to move into number 10, having only moved out of number 11 a couple of days ago.
His team have reportedly been working on his leadership ambitions for some time.
Suella Braverman. She said she is going to stand.
Yes, and I mean, Rishi Sunak, of course, was the front runner. He was seen as someone who was competent, at least within government, but he was very damaged by the revelation around the non-domicile status of his wife, which he's now changed. Of course, we face a huge cost of living crisis, big questions about his political judgment, whether he's too out of touch, really. Is he just too wealthy and out of touch and perhaps politically inexperienced to take over this huge job?
Yeah, his wife's a multi-millionaire. He was, of course, fined as well, along with the Prime Minister.
Yes. So he'd be the second Prime Minister to break the law if he was.
Yeah, so look, I mean, I think Rishi Sunak will be weighing that up this morning. I've asked some people quite close to him whether it's likely that he will stand. The idea at the moment that Boris Johnson's got, that he's going to outline to us at some point in the next few hours, is that it's a matter of weeks and months before the new Prime Minister is decided upon. I don't think some Tory MPs are going to buy that. I've spoken to some by text in the last 20 minutes or so who are saying the Prime Minister needs to go now. Boris Johnson can't wait in office until his successor is chosen. I think there's going to be a big row over that in the next few hours. And all of those potential leadership candidates will be weighing up their options now. When do they declare?
Comes in, and would he be a leadership candidate if he was to be caretaker? That's one name that's being suggested, isn't it?
So that was the name that was being mentioned among Tory MPs yesterday. He didn't do very well last time in the leadership contest. I think if he were to become caretaker PM, which of course he did when Boris Johnson was ill, he wouldn't be able to stand. But that is certainly something that's been discussed over the last few hours.
Of course, yes. I just want to bring in another reaction from Dominic Cummings, who, of course, was instrumental in delivering Brexit. And he has tweeted saying, evict today or he'll cause carnage. Even now he's playing for time and will try to stay. No dignity, no interim, while leadership contest. Raab should be interim Prime Minister by the evening. So there is a question about whether Boris Johnson can even survive the day, isn't it? Nick,
yes, I mean, look, there are some Tory MPs who are saying to me that they think the Prime Minister needs to go now, that the level of bad blood over the last few hours is so significant that they think that the Prime Minister simply can't hold on for a few more days, weeks or months.
And the question about that is partly about his judgment, isn't it? Because we've seen this absolutely unprecedented political crisis, really, with ministers absent in their job, with questions about whether Boris Johnson's judgment really is okay. And autumn is some distance away. We've got a war in Ukraine. We've got a real economic crisis for millions of people in this country. You need somebody in charge, in office, in power, who people can still trust over the next few weeks. And that is a very big question, isn't it?
I think you're absolutely right. And Boris Johnson was planning to do some pretty radical things with tax cuts in the next few weeks. We heard his team talk about that yesterday with the new Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi. I think some Tory MPs will be slightly nervous about keeping Boris Johnson in office to do things that they might not be comfortable with. Now look, this isn't necessarily a majority view yet. I'm giving you a snapshot of opinion about whether or not he can stay in office for the next few weeks. But there is a sense among some wings of the party, including some who have resigned from government in the past 48 hours, that the party just needs a clean break now, that Boris Johnson needs to go immediately, that whatever he says over the next few hours won't save him for the next few weeks or months. And I think they're going to put a lot of pressure on the Prime Minister to do that.
In terms of exactly what happens now, Boris Johnson, we understand, will come and make a statement today confirming he is stepping down. What is the formal process for the Conservatives to choose a replacement leader? And politically, obviously we'll see a lot of opinion polls on this, but what is the sense in the public about whether they still trust the Conservatives? The Conservative MPs who choose the next Prime Minister backed Boris Johnson, put him in office, knowing what his character was like, many will argue.
Yeah, look, in terms of the public opinion, the big fear that Tory MPs had when I was chatting to them yesterday is that the public's turned against the Prime Minister, not just Tory MPs, but the public's had enough. Those two by-elections earlier this month, or last month now, suggest that might be the case. So, look, that's one element of things, is can the Conservative Party win back public trust? In terms of the Prime Minister, I suspect he will want a few weeks to try and do something to have any sort of legacy, to not be the Prime Minister. And obviously he's got the legacy of Brexit, which he's clearly very proud of, but there is a bit of a sense, I think, that he will want to do something over the next few weeks, that he's not just remembered for all the scandals that have now forced him from office. I'm not sure that all of his MPs will be willing to give him that opportunity, though.
And in terms of the key names that could replace the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, we haven't heard anything from the Foreign Secretary, have we? As far as I know. I know she was travelling. Has she said anything? And she is someone who is seen to be pretty popular amongst the Conservative membership, who ultimately decide who takes over.
It's a really good question. She's been very quiet over the last couple of days. She's away at an international conference. My understanding yesterday is that she didn't think it was time to flounce out of the cabinet, as someone put it to me, that she thought it was the time to stay and to try and sort this out. Similar sort of message that we've had from Ben Wallace this morning, that the party needed to act. But she'll be weighing that up, I suspect, this morning, whether she decides to act now, whether she decides it's her time to go for the leadership. One of the interesting things, Geeta, is when I was chatting to Tory MPs this morning, a lot of them were saying that they think that those MPs who didn't resign, who stayed in their jobs, despite everything, that they've been tainted by Boris Johnson. That frankly...
What was their justification? Because it did seem extraordinary that some cabinet ministers, including Suella Braverman, were saying they wanted to stand for the leadership. They thought Boris Johnson should go, but they were still in the cabinet. Nadeem Zahawi, the same. I mean, it seems utterly contradictory.
The cases I've heard for that are varied. So Suella Braverman has said that because she's a law officer, she can't leave that position vacant, so she didn't want to do that. The Foreign Secretary seems to have made the argument that she needs to get on with the job. Likewise, the Defence Secretary has said that he wanted to try and sort out the situation, or be involved in trying to work with the Ukrainian government on that front. It feels to me like a lot of them have been slightly damaged by what has gone on over the last few days. The calculation they'll be now making is whether enough damage has been done to put them in a vulnerable position. The wider question, though, is whether the departure of Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, has been enough to get some of that away from them. And then people like Jeremy Hunt, Tom Tugendhat, Steve Baker will all be hoping that they turned easily enough. Here's one of Boris Johnson's key allies, James Dredridge, walking into... Has the Prime Minister been forced out? Is this a humiliation? Can he last until the autumn?
And that key question of whether Boris Johnson realistically will be allowed to stay in Downing Street right here until the autumn, with these huge global and domestic challenges facing this country, with his judgment being incredibly questioned by his own allies, that is the immediate question, isn't it, going forward?
Yeah, I think that absolutely is it. I mean, look, Boris Johnson over the last few weeks has made the case that if you look at President Zelensky in Ukraine, that Boris Johnson has been one of his key allies. President Zelensky's made that point as well. The Prime Minister, I suspect, will have come to the conclusion that he needs to steady the ship a bit over the next few weeks. But whether he can actually do that is another matter. Firstly, do Tory MPs trust him on policy? Are they worried that he might try and do something to change his own legacy rather than to protect the party or the government or indeed the country? Do they think that he has created so much anger in the party, the sacking of Michael Gove, the sense that he was going to stay on no matter what happened? Does that do enough damage to his reputation that it's impossible for him to stay on? Those conversations are happening right now. I'm getting texts from Tory MPs who are having those conversations. I suppose the question is, do they conclude that so much damage has been done in here that even the Prime Minister saying he's going to go isn't enough?
I'll let you read some of those texts in a minute. I just want to ask you about the position of the opposition, though, because in the polls in the last few months, the Labour Party have been ahead of the Conservatives, and that is partly, along with these by-election results, confirming that public opinion switch is what scared Conservative MPs perhaps and prompted them to move. But Although Keir Starmer has said he welcomes Boris Johnson's resignation because they feel that it damages the country, it actually potentially hugely changes the arithmetic on whether the Conservatives become favourites for the next election or the Labour Party.
Look, I think that's absolutely right. The Conservative Party will hope that by putting a new leader in, they can change the direction of travel for the party. They can get it back on course. They can say, new leader, new agenda, let's move on. Labour will be hoping that the new leader is seen as tainted by what's gone on in Number 10 over the last few months, and that actually the Conservative Party are in a spiral of decline now, equivalent to the one we saw under John Major, which led to that Tony Blair landslide. I mean, I've got to say the polls don't suggest that that Keir Starmer's on course for a massive landslide in this place, but it throws the political questions out into the open. What happens at the next general election? To be honest, it's anyone's guess now. The next few months are going to define that. We don't know who the new Tory leader is going to be. We don't know what the party is going to decide are its priorities. Has it moved on from Brexit, that it's happy to have someone who voted Remain? Does it still feel that it needs someone to take the battle to the European Union as it did with Boris Johnson? Will it only vote for someone that promises them tax cuts? Does it want someone who's prepared to spend more on dealing with the cost of living crisis? The Tory party has had an absolute identity crisis over the last few weeks, not just because of Boris Johnson's leadership, but because of some of his policies too. The highest tax burden in some time. All of that has contributed to this sense of Tory MPs wondering what they are doing and what they want to do next. That's what they'll be weighing up this afternoon as they decide who they want to be the next leader. I'd expect there to be a number of people put their hat into the ring and a big debate about the future of the Conservative Party.
OK, Nick, I'll let you read some of those texts. I just want to sum up where we are. It is 10 o'clock now here on BBC News, welcoming all our viewers in the UK and around the world, as it is confirmed that Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, is going to resign, having faced a huge onslaught of criticism and resignations from the Cabinet, from ministerial ranks, from backbench MPs, a wave of protest, concerns that he was perhaps threatening even the unwritten constitution by staying on, despite clearly having lost the confidence of the Conservative Party, no longer able to command Parliament, and under those circumstances he really had no choice other than to step down. There was a fear that he was going to try to cling on for even longer, forcing a backbench vote, a vote of no confidence, to finally force him out, and a lot of criticism about perhaps even pseudo-Trumpian tactics and questions about Boris Johnson's judgment. But now finally the Prime Minister has confirmed, we've had it confirmed from Downing Street, he is going to step down. Let's get some more reaction to the breaking news. And John Maguire is on College Green.
Yeah, the news just obviously filtering through to us on College Green, people starting to realise exactly what's happened. We've talked about it so much over the last couple of days, weeks, months. It feels like even longer than that, doesn't it? But certainly coming to fruition right now. We can talk to Lord Robert Hayward. Good morning. Good morning. Lord Hayward, to you. You remember events of 1990 when Mrs Thatcher left, of course. Firstly, your reaction to the decision the Prime Minister has made today that it's finally time to go.
I think it's relief from the parliamentary party. Yesterday there was an atmosphere that inevitably in these sorts of circumstances was primarily febrile, everybody gossiping as to when's it going to happen, who's going to be the next contenders, those sorts of things. But also there was a sense late yesterday afternoon of frustration that Boris Johnson had not actually announced his intention to go, and in some cases it was much more than frustration, it was downright antagonism.
Despair was the word that Steve Baker used when we spoke to him earlier, and I suppose the writing was on the wall, really, wasn't it? Once those ministerial resignations started to come in thick and fast, did people think that he hung on too long?
Very much so. Actually, the writing was probably on the wall from the point of a vote of no confidence, because historically every Prime Minister, Conservative Prime Minister that's faced the problem or the issue of a vote of no confidence has then gone on to resign, whether it's a few days later or a few weeks later, but I think that's when the writing started.
There's been a lot of talk this morning that with so many ministerial vacancies that the work of government just couldn't progress. And also we're surrounded by international colleagues from American broadcasters that it was damaging brand Britain. Is that a point? Is that something you agree with?
It is fair comment. Uncertainty, it goes in politics, but the nature of uncertainty in relation to a Prime Minister can actually be damaging to things like the pound, the financial markets. And if you're damaging the pound, you're actually making ordinary people's holidays in Spain or France or wherever more expensive than they would otherwise be.
Not to mention exports and imports, of course, with that balance as well. And you talked about that sense of, well, we talked about the sense of despair, but maybe even anger. What about now? What will the mood be like now? Will people already be ringing around, gathering support, trying to figure out whether they've got enough to throw their hat in the ring, as we say?
You know politicians as well as I do. They've been doing that for a while. They'll have got their lists marked and their potential organisations. There'll be those who are considering whether they should run, taking soundings, but clearly it will now be much more open, specific requests of people. I knew well before Mrs Thatcher went that I'd be involved in John Major's campaign team when it happened. It wasn't if it happened, and that's the same sort of thing that have been happening recently. We'll see, I think, a lot of candidates from all sorts of sides of the Tory party. Some leadership elections, it's quite clear it's down to 1, 2, 3 people. On this occasion, I think we'll probably see up to 10 people openly considering whether they might be a candidate, and I would be surprised if the declared candidacies are less than 5 or 6.
Timescale wise, is this the sort of thing that needs to be sorted out in the next 2 weeks before the summer recess?
No, it can't be. That's the real problem, and that's why I think, although I understand that Boris Johnson's going to suggest that he continues until the new leader is elected, probably in the autumn, because our leadership elections not solely involve MPs, but they involve party memberships, they involve hustings and all those sorts of things. There is a possibility, I would have thought, that because many of the ministers have resigned over integrity and decency issues, that there might be pressure for Boris Johnson to stand aside and Dominic Raab act as Deputy Prime Minister, acting Prime Minister pro tem.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for your time, Lord Hayward. Always interesting to hear from a parliamentarian with so much experience, isn't it? That somebody that remembers what happened to Margaret Thatcher back in 1990, that, as he said, then put in place the procedures for her successor, which of course turned out to be John Major. So busy times ahead, not only in the House of Commons, but of course in Downing Street where you are. So back to you.
John Maguire, thanks very much indeed. They're live on College Green. I just want to show you a tweet from Mark Drakeford, First Minister of Wales, who has said all 4 nations need a stable UK government, and I'm therefore pleased to see the Prime Minister has now done the right thing and agreed to resign. So again, relief from all the nations and the opposition parties, of course. Mark Drakeford, the Labour First Minister of Wales, welcoming the resignation of Boris Johnson. One question, Nick Eardley is with us, of course, still. Nick, do we actually have a government? Because we have lost so many key ministers who've resigned. In terms of the business of government, making decisions, all that isn't now happening.
We have a government. I'm not sure it's functioning, though. There are some departments, like the Department for Education, which currently have no ministers. It's an extraordinary set of circumstances, and actually I think the calculation that may have been made in there this morning, one we've been talking about on air all morning, is Boris Johnson probably couldn't fill all the vacant roles. The level of anger against him was such that he was probably done. He had nowhere left to turn to fill those ministerial posts. Just one other fact that's worth bearing in mind. Boris Johnson is going to tell us later he wants to stay during a leadership contest. Tory MPs are texting us and getting in touch and posting online and saying on air that they don't think that's feasible. Boris Johnson at the moment has been Prime Minister for 28 days fewer than Theresa May. And I suspect part of his calculation will be he doesn't want to be seen as the Prime Minister who served even less than the last one.
And Nick, I mean, I remember George Osborne saying repeatedly, privately and publicly, that Boris Johnson would do anything to stay in power. And we have seen that, haven't we? And the question for the Conservatives is going to be, how damaging has this whole saga been? Why did the Cabinet not resign earlier? Why did, backbench members, junior ministers not make those feelings of being incredibly concerned public earlier? Because we were all hearing that privately, and yet they didn't say it publicly. So they are open to the charge of propping up, installing a Prime Minister and then propping him up, even though they actually had very deep concerns.
It's hard to overstate the level of despair in the Conservative Party yesterday. It's hard to overstate just how angry some MPs were with Cabinet Ministers that they weren't moving. You heard that speech from Sajid Javid after PMQs yesterday, Sajid Javid's resignation speech in the Commons, where he said not making a choice is, or not moving, not doing anything is an active choice. And I think that pressure became so significant that yesterday evening we had a number of Cabinet Ministers walk behind that black door and say to the Prime Minister, time's up. Now, he was planning on sticking it out. The message from number 10 last night was there isn't going to be a lectern out in the street. This is a Prime Minister who has a mandate from the public that he's determined to get on with. But this morning, the fact that a bunch of Cabinet Ministers had told the Prime Minister to go and were on resignation watch, Priti Patel, Grant Shapps, a number of others. Add into the mix what happened this morning, Nadhim Zahawi, the new Chancellor, the Chancellor for just over a day saying the PM had to go, the new Education Secretary for just over a day saying the PM had to go and resigning that new job she had. That has forced Boris Johnson out. He was doing everything he could last night to try and stay in there. The message we were getting overnight was that Boris Johnson had a reshuffle on the cards. He was figuring out ways to try and get his top team back operational again. But the fact that that steady stream of resignations just continued made that impossible and has forced the Prime Minister out.
George Freeman, a minister who has resigned today, has tweeted saying, we need ministers back at their desks. Now the Prime Minister's finally done the decent thing. He needs to hand in the seals of office, apologise to Her Majesty, allow her to appoint a caretaker under whom ministers can serve so the Conservative Party can choose a new leader properly. Now that is part of what you're hearing, isn't it? That people don't feel comfortable with Boris Johnson staying here for the next few weeks.
That's right. I'm hearing other Tory MPs say that they think it will be over a lot quicker than the autumn.
Whose decision is it in terms of whether he is allowed to stay?
Well, I mean, look, the Prime Minister can set out what he wants to do and try and go on his own timetable, something that Cabinet Ministers were telling him to do yesterday. The timetable is up to the Conservative Party. They are the ones who will decide when a new leader is elected. Remember that David Cameron planned to stay in office for quite a while a new leader was elected. And then Theresa May, because Andrea Leadsom pulled out, was in a lot quicker than most people expected. So there will be a conversation going on right now in the Conservative Party about how quickly that process could be done. But this is separate to that. There are Tory MPs so angry at what's happened over the last few days, furious at the fact that the Prime Minister tried to cling on in there, furious that he sacked Michael Gove last night, furious that his allies were telling me last night that they were treacherous. They're so angry about that they just don't think Boris Johnson can hang on for a few more weeks or months. Dominic Raab is the name that I keep hearing as a potential interim Prime Minister. That won't go down well with everybody. There are some of his colleagues, to put it mildly, who don't rate him. But remember, he did do it when Boris Johnson was in hospital with COVID. So I think he's the most likely character at the moment. Anyone else who could command support across the party while there's a big debate about their political future, it's hard to see at the moment.
Just for one final one for now on Michael Gove, because a lot of Michael Gove's allies are in Downing Street in very key positions, aren't they? So the whole repeat, in a way, of the sort of psychodrama between the Boris-Michael Gove relationship that we've seen played out in the last 24 hours is extraordinary, because actually Michael Gove and his team, his people, were quite fundamental to the way government was operating.
Yeah, I mean, look, some of them were sacked recently as well. So some of Michael Gove's kind of key allies in number 10 weren't there anymore. But yeah, I think you're right. Michael Gove's allies in the Conservative Party, the MPs as well, are among those who I'm hearing from this morning who are most furious about the idea that the PM might stay on for a few more weeks or a few more months yet. It's also that question of Michael Gove said consistently he won't stand. I wonder if he might just be tempted, given everything that's gone on in the last few weeks.
And if you were just to put your neck on the line for a moment, in terms of the key front runners, because obviously there'll be a raft of names, is it possible to say at this stage who they'll be? And will it be on the basis of, you know, low tax, high tax? What are the dividing?
Tax will be a key debate. The tax burden at the moment, as Tory MPs describe it, makes a lot of them angry. They want to see personal tax cuts as soon as possible. I think Brexit might still feed into it, particularly issues over the protocol. Who can take that battle to Brussels as Tory MPs see it? That's the calculation they'll be having. Who can keep the union together? Big question for Scottish Tory MPs. Let me just rattle through a few names. Rishi Sunak, Sajid Javid, Jeremy Hunt, Tom Tugendhat, Suella Braverman, Steve Baker, Liz Truss. Have them all on your list today. We'll see if any of them come out and say they're definitely standing.
OK, well, I think we can hear one voice from the Conservative Party. Andrew Bridgen is in College Green with John Maguire.
Good morning. We have Andrew Bridgen, also Andrew Bowie as well. Gentlemen, good morning to the both of you. Mr. Bridgen, if I start with you, we spoke yesterday morning. We were trying to predict what was going to happen. Surprised? Shocked?
Relieved.
Right.
I think we've seen, you know, even Boris Johnson couldn't defy political gravity forever. He's done the right thing finally and put the country first. Going to tender his resignation. We haven't seen his statement yet, but I eagerly await it. And now we can move forward.
What might be in it? What do you think convinced him that the game was up?
Well, there's three ways that a Prime Minister can be removed. Either a vote of the whole House, a vote of the Conservative Party in a confidence motion, or the collapse of a government. And Boris Johnson ended up in the position where nobody wanted to serve under him and he couldn't fill his vacancies in the cabinet or the government. Government was not going to work this morning because bill committees didn't have a minister to present the bill to the committee.
Andrew Bowie, when we draw the timeline, when historians draw the timeline of Boris Johnson's downfall, perhaps one of the starting points might be the Owen Paterson affair. That was when you resigned. You made that decision in advance of many of your other colleagues. Why did you go then?
Well, look, I was put in the invidious position of having to defend the indefensible on Owen Paterson. I do think it was the first domino to fall, but I wasn't the last person that was sent out to defend something for which they were not responsible for. Mistakes that were made in Downing Street, ministers, good, decent men and women, being asked to go out and defend something almost whilst on air, the lines were changing from Downing Street, and I think that, as Andrew said, it was completely unsustainable to imagine that the Prime Minister could carry on. We did not have a functioning government in this country yesterday evening. We did not have ministers able to take bills into bill committees or onto the floor of the House. And finally, I'm glad the Prime Minister has seen that, and he's done the decent thing, and for the good of the country, being the Conservative Party, he has decided to move on.
And when you're sent out to do that, to defend the indefensible, whether you know it or not, talking to people like us, what sort of impact does that have on you?
Well, of course, it's embarrassing, really, and you feel a sense of shame at having to do that, especially when the thing that you've gone on to defend then changes. The story changes almost whilst you're live on air. So I think a lot of people, a lot of good, decent ministers over the weekend found themselves giving lines and defending something for which they just couldn't stand anymore. And that's why I think we've got to the position that we've got to.
Long-lasting damage, do you think, or is it something that once a successor is appointed, whenever that might be, you can recover from?
I think the damage can be limited if Boris goes straight away and we have an interim Prime Minister other than Boris Johnson while we sort out our leadership issues. That's the way I'd like to see it going. I think history will be kinder to Boris Johnson than I probably will be today or for the next week or two, or maybe the public will be. He will remember as the man who got us through Brexit, got us through COVID, two enormous emergencies, which most Prime Ministers would never see either of those issues, no matter how long they served in government. He's got us through those, but he's made the right decision now and we need to move on.
But those tumultuous decisions, those huge events, world events, I mean, even Brexit, a world event, weren't enough to save him.
No, I think that what we've seen over the past 9 months since Owen Paterson is that there is a genuine disconnection between Downing Street and reality. And I agree with Andrew. He did get Brexit done. He did get the big calls right through the pandemic. And I absolutely believe that the Conservative Party, of all political parties in this country right now, have the answers to see us through the cost of living situation that we're facing right now. Nobody that I talk to in my constituency around the country tells me that a Keir Starmer government is the answer to the current problems we are facing. So yes, he did. And I think history will look back on those huge decisions with kindness. But right now, he was the wrong man for the job. It's quite clear we didn't have a functioning government, and he had to go. And I'm very, very pleased that this morning he has seen that.
My concerns about the Prime Minister's conduct were actually before Owen Paterson, which I didn't vote for that either. It was almost a year ago when he tried to remove Sir Graham Brady himself from the 1922 committee and having his own place person there to replace him. That's when the alarm bells started ringing for me, and I started to lose confidence in him.
And what's the mood been like in that place over the last, well, let's say over the last 24 hours, last 48 hours?
Grim is the only way I can describe it yesterday. Disbelieving, not quite understanding what was going on. None of us, Andrew's been here quite a few years longer than I, could remember having seen anything quite like what we saw yesterday. I think there's now a sense of relief. Whatever side of the argument you were on, there's now relief that we now know what's going to happen and that the party and the country can move on. And we do need to move on, and that's what we're going to do.
Talking of moving on then, who should take up, who should be the next resident of number 10, permanent resident?
Well, we've got a mechanism for that which works to deliver a leader. We'll have nominations will open, and parliamentary party will whittle it down to 2 candidates. They'll go out to the membership. Given that we've got summer recess coming up, the timing couldn't be better. We will have a new leader of the Conservative Party in place well before conference, and then we can move forward. And that's really important for the country and Parliament and our party.
And does the party feel divided? Will the candidate need to be somebody that can unite the party, do you think?
It'll be divisive for the few weeks during the... they always say that a Conservative leadership election is like a circular firing squad, isn't it?
Yeah.
There'll be a fair amount of collateral damage and a bit of division, but we'll come back together again because we have to, because we're elected to represent the whole country, and we're facing some serious issues at the moment.
Mr. Bower, any names?
Right now, the Prime Minister has just resigned. I've no idea who's standing or what they're standing on. So I think we, as Andrew said, we've got a mechanism for delivering a leader. When that leader is elected, we will unite behind that leader for the good of the country and carry on delivering our manifesto commitments on which we all got elected in 2019.
All right. Thank you both for talking to us this morning. Whether or not we believe you, whether you know the names, who you're backing, of course, will all be revealed. So from College Green, Rita, back to you.
Thanks very much indeed, John Maguire there. I just want to bring you a couple more tweets. Kwasi Kwarteng has tweeted saying, what a depressing state of affairs. So much needless damage caused. We now need a new leader as soon as practicable. Someone who can rebuild trust, heal the country and set out a new sensible and consistent economic approach to help families. Not clear whether he would throw his hat in the ring or whether he would, who he might back, but of course we know that a number of Conservative members of the Cabinet and those outside the Cabinet, well, it's certainly been talked about their desire to perhaps step into that leadership race. We think it's going to be a very wide field. Another MP, Simon Hoare, has tweeted saying Boris Johnson should not be allowed to stay through till the autumn, as number 10 are briefing, and he's saying go means go, and that concern from a number of people in the Conservative Party itself that Boris Johnson might try to cling on even for a few weeks whilst the Conservative race continues. There's clearly a lot of unease about that, probably given the way the last 24, 48 hours has unfolded, with concerns about whether Boris Johnson would push the UK into some sort of really serious constitutional crisis and try to cling on for some weeks and months, even triggering a general election, and therefore unease about whether, now that he has said he's going to resign, we're waiting for a full statement, of course, in person from Boris Johnson, that he should be forced out really as soon as possible from Downing Street. Let's speak to Jonathan Liss, who joins me now. Just your reaction to these unfolding events. Jonathan, we are finally hearing Boris Johnson has agreed to resign.
Well, I suppose even Boris Johnson has to read the writing on the wall at some point. Everyone around him could see this was inevitable. We don't have a presidential system in this country, no matter how much Johnson would like it to be. And if you don't have the support of your cabinet, your party, or parliament at large, you simply cannot remain in office as prime minister. We had a possibility that Johnson might have thought to do a Trump and defy every single constitutional norm. I think even those of us who are very opposed to Johnson can be glad that he's not actually gone down that route.
In terms of who decides and how it's decided whether Boris Johnson does stay until the autumn or not, what's your sense on that? Is it the 1922 committee, is it the Conservative Party ultimately that will have to force that decision?
I think that the message of the last couple of days is that Johnson has no authority in the Conservative Party, and this isn't actually up to him. I think he serves at the pleasure of his party and cabinet. You have an extraordinary situation that you didn't have when Thatcher and May resigned, which is that basically you have no cabinet in post and almost half your ministers have resigned. So there isn't sort of a cabinet ready and waiting to serve. And if you've had this situation where dozens and dozens of ministers have written to the Prime Minister to say that he's not fit to serve, how can they then change their minds even for 3 months? All the arguments that the Tories were using to prop Johnson up in the last few months, namely the cost of living crisis, Ukraine, having to get on with the job, and now arguments against him staying in office. Because this is such a critical period in our nation's history, there's no time for a caretaker, no time for paralysis.
Well, if there was to be a caretaker right now, wouldn't anyone within the cabinet, people are suggesting Dominic Raab, aren't they all, embroiled in every decision that Boris Johnson's done, given they've all been in his cabinet until now?
Of course, and that is a reason that the British public can make their minds up about those people. But, as you say, Dominic Raab is the Deputy Prime Minister. That job title literally exists for moments like this. There is someone ready and willing to take up the baton. I don't think anyone would begrudge that sort of caretaker role for a few weeks while the Conservatives elect a new leader. You don't have to like Dominic Raab to support that proposition. So I don't see why there has to be a big crisis now, and I certainly don't understand why Johnson needs to stay on until October, which is far longer than any Conservative leadership election would take.
And what is your sense of how that leadership election will pan out in terms of the key candidates?
It's really too early to say, I think. I mean, obviously, Rishi Sunak was a shoo-in for Prime Minister until he sabotaged himself with those policies and with the fine a few months ago. I think he might have rescued some of that credibility with his resignation this week. It remains to be seen how the party will respond to that, but certainly he's been dented and damaged. Liz Truss is the other person that we've been talking about for a long time, but she really only appeals to a narrow segment of the party, and I don't suppose she'll get much traction in the country. And crucially, I don't think Labour would fear her as an opponent. Then you have other people such as Nadhim Zahawi, who has demonstrated over the course of the last 2 days that he's in this for his ambition and his career rather than the good of the country. And then you have other wildcards such as Jeremy Hunt, Sajid Javid, maybe Tom Tugendhat. But again, these people cannot bring the country together or even their own party.
I just want to bring in a tweet from Guy Verhofstadt, Jonathan. I don't know whether you've seen it, but it was about an hour ago. He has said Boris Johnson's reign ends in disgrace, just like his friend Donald Trump. The end of an era of transatlantic populism. Let's hope so. EU-UK relations suffered hugely with Johnson's choice of Brexit. Things can only get better. Of course, whoever takes on the mantle of Tory leader in the coming weeks will dictate how this country progresses with the ongoing Brexit relations, what happens with the Northern Ireland Protocol, and that has an impact on EU-UK relations and the integrity of the UK.
Absolutely, and I think it's really important to bring this point up, actually, because obviously people like me are consumed with the personality, the drama, the entertainment even of the last couple of days, but there are real policy issues at stake. Obviously, we just mentioned the cost of living and Ukraine, but there's also the small matter of Britain's international law breaking and its decision to rip up its treaty with our largest political and commercial partners in the EU. Now, If you have someone like Liz Truss, who's obviously steered through the Northern Ireland Protocol legislation, she will not soften Britain's stance against the EU. And it remains to be seen who in this potential tranche of candidates will actually do the decent thing and suspend the Northern Ireland Protocol legislation before it actually does take effect and brings on a possible trade war with the EU. The most important thing is that we reset our relationship with the EU, because it serves no one's interest to be at any kind of political or commercial loggerheads with our closest friends and neighbours.
OK, Jonathan, Liz, thank you very much indeed for being with us. I know you were waiting for a while to come to us, but we really appreciate your time today. Getting reaction, of course, all the time. John Maguire, a few minutes ago, spoke to Steve Baker on College Green, a key supporter, of course, in the past of Boris Johnson, who was one of those who'd called for him to go.
It's been an eventful morning, an eventful last 48 hours, you could say, an eventful last couple of years in government for Boris Johnson. Steve Baker, the news is just coming through that he will resign. Your reaction?
Well, I'm filled with sorrow about it. I wanted Boris Johnson to be an absolutely roaring success. That was my hope and expectation. So it fills me with sorrow that it's come to this. But I think it's absolutely the right decision. I will certainly always remember that Boris got us out of a terrible constitutional crisis, beat Jeremy Corbyn, far left, could have been a disaster for our country, and got a great future relationship. Just need to sort out the Northern Ireland Protocol. But overall, I think, thank goodness now we can, remember Boris saved this country from a really massive crisis, and thank goodness he's now agreed in the circumstances it's right to go.
Who knows what his legacy might be, but where did it all go so horribly wrong over the last weeks and months?
It's very, very clear to me this has been about the handling, ultimately, of the Chris Pincher affair. That's the moment that has crystallised in ministers' minds that they couldn't support the government. And it's perfectly plain. It's not been about policy. This hasn't been about people like me who are free marketeers not liking what he was doing. That's never been... We all accepted he was, as he put it, a Brexity Heseltine, lots of intervention, but out of the EU. So accepted that, perhaps with a bit of disappointment, but accepted it. And what's happened is ministers have seen... Well, they've referred to a lack of honesty and integrity, and we clearly can't have that. And it's much better the PM goes now than dragging on to the Privileges Committee, potentially finding that he'd knowingly misled the House, because that would have been a disaster too. So,
what's the mood been like amongst...
Despair.
Right.
And people haven't... I've been through a lot, 7 years of being in the centre of things, and I've never seen colleagues in a deeper sense of despair than they have been in the last 24 hours. Because people have been enthusiastically supporting Boris, and they have wanted to rescue him from the situation he's been in, and of course they'll be bitterly disappointed. What we've got to do again is bring ourselves together, remember that we collectively are the leaders of our country, whether people like it or not. We've got a majority in Parliament, we've got to behave with integrity and openness, not talk to our opponents but talk to the public, because the mums and dads and the people of this country watching this programme deserve to be well governed by people with integrity, and we've just got to give that to them.
And did it therefore become too much of a circus? Were there too many distractions? Was the daily work of government, the cost of living crisis, war in Ukraine or whatever, was that starting to suffer?
I think it has to be admitted that yes, of course it has suffered. But let's be realistic, the last 24 hours did become a circus. You can't govern if you've got ministers resigning in a great avalanche. That thankfully now will come to an end. Ben Wallace was right to say that he needed to stay in post as Defence Secretary. I'm glad he said that. We now need to get just stable, have a policy of continuity, have a leadership contest which will happen very quickly, and then in September when we come back, fresh start, and get to a position where we win the next election because we deserve to win. I believe we can be in that position. We have got to deliver it though with a great imperative.
Has the brand been damaged too much by what's happened over recent months?
The Conservative Party endures. The Conservative Party endures. It's one of the two great parties of government of this country. I believe in the Conservative Party. I've long believed we needed to shift emphasis, but it's a broad church, a broad family. And I believe the people of this country are basically Tories, even if sometimes they vote Labour. And I respect the people of this country, and I want to see them given good government. So I do believe in the Conservative Party. I think we should make no mistake that the next government will either be Labour-led, probably with the SNP, or Conservative-led. And it really should be an outright Conservative majority delivering on this direction of travel for our country, which people have approved of resoundingly. And we just need to put smiles on our faces now, lift ourselves up, stand tall, and get on and deliver in a responsible way.
There's only now 2 weeks until parliamentary recess until you take your summer break. Just talk us through those 2 weeks. Is that enough time to get 2 candidates, and who should those candidates be?
So that now clearly is enough time to get down to 2 candidates to put to the Conservative Party membership. It would have been even trickier if the Prime Minister had needed removing, but now he's going. I'm very, very confident we will whittle down candidates to 2 by the end of the parliamentary term. That is just to that's to let MPs get back to their constituencies and serve the public in that way. But we can do it in 2 weeks. It'll be frantic. I'm afraid many of you are going to be out here on the green for 2 weeks. Some of us are going to have to live on adrenaline for 2 weeks, but we'll do it.
Have you already had phone calls? Have you already either offered your services to someone? Will you tell us who that is, and have they rung you?
Well, people will know that in the last 7 of the 12 years I've been in Parliament, I have provided leadership and organisation through really massive crises, whether it's been Brexit or COVID, race relations, net zero. So of course I've taken a lot of calls and meetings with potential leaders. And now I'm seriously thinking whether I should do it, because, you know, I got into politics because I thought I wanted an MP I always agreed with. Well, maybe I'd like a Prime Minister that could be counted on to do what I thought best. So I know what I'm looking for: fierce resolve, humility, integrity, a willingness to do what's actually right for the long and short term of this country. And so, of course, I'm seriously considering standing, because Conservative Home members consistently put me in their top 10. So I should respect them and take that seriously.
Steve Baker there saying he will potentially run for the Conservative leadership. Well, a key candidate who is apparently popular with the Tory base is Liz Truss. What do we know, Nick Eardley, about her at the moment?
We've not heard anything from her in the last couple of days. That's because she's on a trip to Indonesia. I've heard in the last few minutes she's coming back. She's cut that trip short, and she'll be making a statement later. There's a lot of speculation that she's been working on a campaign, getting ready to launch one. It sounds to me like we may well hear if Liz Truss is going to do that later today.
Yes, Chris Mason has tweeted, hasn't he, saying that she is going to issue a statement. Do we know whether MPs are being canvassed, whether they have been canvassed, offered jobs, you know, sounded out for support?
Well, look, I think there's been canvassing going on for some time, actually. Yeah, there always is a kind of setting up of potential successors to a Prime Minister. There have been a lot of evenings in private members' clubs in the West End of London. There have been lots of conversations in the tea rooms. There is no shortage of people who have been making clear to their colleagues that they're likely to stand. Jeremy Hunt has been one who's been schmoozing a lot over the last few weeks. But as I say, Liz Truss heading back to the UK imminently, statement shortly. Seems to me possible that she'll stand for the leadership to succeed Boris Johnson.
Nick Eardley, thanks very much indeed. We still don't quite know when Boris Johnson is going to come out and make a statement, if that's what he's going to do, come out and make a podium statement here, actually confirming his resignation. But we do know that Downing Street have said that the Prime Minister is going to step down, and the questions now are all about how long he stays here while the Conservatives run that race. Let's speak to Henry Hill of Conservative Home. First of all, Henry, what is your sense of the reaction across different parts of the Conservative Party to today's news?
Relief. Just relief. I mean, the Prime Minister has a small band of loyalists, but beyond that, there's no great Johnsonite faction. You know, you remember the last time, or recall the last time there was a Conservative psychodrama over deposing a leader with Margaret Thatcher. There was a great caucus of Thatcherite Tory MPs who wanted to go down with the ship and were prepared to fight to the last. There's none of that here, really. This has been a very painful period for the party. The Conservative MPs have been sort of limping towards deposing Boris Johnson for some weeks. And it's just a relief that after yesterday's sort of slightly wild talk about clinging on, Nadine Dorries going around talking about mass deselections of rebel MPs, it's just good that it looks like the Constitution is going to work, he's going to do the right thing, and we're going to have an orderly handover.
Is much of the cabinet and the ministerial rank who did not act until now, in fact some of them still not resigning, are they all now very tainted?
I think it will be difficult for them to ask why this took so long to happen, because it's not as if Boris Johnson's flaws are new. It's not as if we learned anything particularly shocking, or, well, it was shocking, but it's not as if we learned anything about Boris Johnson with the Chris Pincher story that we didn't really already know since at least Partygate, about his character, his approach to the office. You can see tactically why some of them are doing it. There is amongst the Conservative grassroots who will have the final say if there is a full leadership contest. There is a substantial block of activists who are very pro-Boris Johnson, and you can see why a potential leadership contender would want to keep them on side. But I think in terms of the dignity of government and the simple question of what sort of message do we want to send to the nation about the values of the Conservative Party and how it operates in office, I think it would be very difficult for people who served in this government this long to field that question.
And so does that mean that the leadership is more likely to go to someone like Jeremy Hunt?
No, Jeremy Hunt. Unfortunately for Jeremy, Conservative Home did a runoff of all the many various candidates in our latest survey of party members, and he came last. I'm not saying that we'll rule out anyone from the current cabinet really who wanted to stand, who's a contender. The contest is wide open. There is no heir apparent, and I think I should say that there would be an exception to this general principle, I think, for somebody like Ben Wallace, who is widely perceived to be doing a good job in defence. And I don't think anyone blames him, given that we're basically sort of fighting a proxy war in Ukraine, for the fact that he's stuck about to try and get on with that job despite what's going on elsewhere in government. But I think that the field is wide open. And whereas normally you'd expect somebody from the cabinet to take the job, it can't be ruled out entirely that somebody from the backbenches does actually end up winning, or at least sort of running very close in any upcoming leadership contest.
Is this going to very heavily split the Tories? Do you think they are realistically looking at a period in opposition now in order to fully reinvent themselves? Because this period has been extremely damaging. We've seen them falling behind in the polls to Labour.
I suspect, honestly, if they pick the right leader, they can probably win the next election. They've got a big buffer. It's important to remember that that over majority of 80, it has been whittled down by by-elections, but that is a huge ask for Labour to overturn in one election. And that's not counting the fact that if they pick the right leader, that new leader will have a honeymoon. They now control the timing of the next general election because they repealed the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. So it's not out of the question that they win the next election. I think for them, that's probably the best outcome, because they could win the next election and then Labour will probably win sort of at the later half of the 2020s with new leadership. Brexit will be a long way behind the country. Labour will probably win properly and not have to start doing deals with the Liberal Democrats or the SNP. So I think the Tories, obviously every government loses office eventually, and I think the Tories will be out of office by the end of the 2020s. But I do think that they still have it in them to win the next election if they make the right choice now.
OK. Henry Hill from Conservative Home, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, what is the process now? Has Boris Johnson spoken to the Queen? Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell is in the newsroom. Nicholas, what's your understanding on that?
Buckingham Palace will not confirm that a conversation has taken place between Boris Johnson and the Queen, but I think we must assume that it has taken place. It would be a matter of courtesy for a Prime Minister who has decided that he is going to resign at some point in the future to inform the head of state, and indeed that is what I think Downing Street is telling political correspondents. And I'm quite sure that the Queen and her senior officials will have been watching this situation very, very closely over the past 48 hours with some concern, I'm sure, last night at the prospect of a Prime Minister having evidently lost the confidence of his own party, but last night refusing to step aside. And in a situation such as this, you have the Queen's Private Secretary, Sir Edward Young, keeping closely in touch with the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, who of course used to be a member of the Royal Household, and the Prime Minister's Private Secretary. And their priority is to ensure, insofar as they can, that there is as much stability as possible within government. And also, it is absolutely the convention that the Queen must be kept out of a situation such as this. It is for the politicians to resolve it, and that this morning is clearly what has now happened. So looking ahead, there is no involvement now by the Queen at the moment because Boris Johnson remains as Prime Minister until a successor has been chosen, and it will only be then that Boris Johnson will go to either Buckingham Palace or, of course, at the moment that the Queen is at Windsor Castle, but it will only be then that the outgoing Prime Minister goes to see the monarch, and a few moments later the successor comes in and is invited by the Queen to form a a government. And remember, the sole criteria for that invitation is that that person who is invited to form a government must be a person who can command the confidence of the British House of Commons. That is the sole yardstick by which the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is chosen.
And Nick, do you know whether there had been any conversations between Number 10 or within the Buckingham Palace staff about this whole constitutional crisis question, about, you know, whether Boris Johnson would have had the authority to call an early election? Some are speculating might be a tactic. What happens when a Prime Minister clings to office but doesn't have enough support to create a government? Because it is of course a political decision, not one that rests with the monarchy, but in our unwritten constitution some of these lines are quite complex, they're quite blurred.
It would be, I think, very odd if conversations had not been taking place between those three officials who I mentioned a moment ago. They're sometimes referred to as the golden triangle between the palace and Downing Street, the Cabinet Secretary, the Prime Minister's Private Secretary and the Queen's Private Secretary. And I would imagine that in a situation such as this, that they would have been keeping closely in touch, keeping each other informed. Now, all this chatter about whether Boris Johnson might have called a general election or asked the Queen to dissolve Parliament in order for there to be a general election, I suspect that that may have been really rather overstated, but it is certainly the case that in a situation such as that, the monarch is perfectly entitled to refuse such a request, because it is only a request, basically on the basis that it wouldn't be in the national interest and that there would be others within the governing party who could command the confidence of the House of Commons, which, as I say, is the important consideration in all of this.
OK, Nick Witchell, many thanks indeed there in the Newsroom for us. Let's go live to the House of Commons, because the government has been asked an urgent questioning on the functioning of a government. I think Angela Rayner posed that. Let's listen in.
The government and the civil service will continue to function in the meantime, as they always have done and as they have done historically.
Well done.
Sir Christopher Cho.
Mr. Speaker, may I thank the Prime Minister for his great service to our nation and also to the people of Ukraine. And I think that people will rue the day that he was forced to resign. But can I say to my right honourable friend that isn't there a lot to be said for having a smaller cabinet, fewer ministers and hardly any parliamentary private secretaries, and can we have a pilot to show how successful that's going to be?
Minister. Well, he makes a perfectly interesting point, but is somewhat outside the range of my responsibilities.
Dame Angela Riedel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have here a list of all of the resignations from government. Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't read them out, but there's plenty of tasty quotes in there that will be of use later on. The Minister can't sensibly argue that we have a functioning government when this number of people are missing. There are no people, ministers, to do statutory committees and legislation even as we speak. So what is the way forward? He can't just blather at the dispatch box when the government's disintegrating around him.
The business of the House of Commons will continue, and there are ministers to continue in place. I cannot preempt the Prime Minister's statement, but I've spoken to the Cabinet Secretary today, and government and civil service will continue to function in their public duty.
Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful and have to my right honourable and learned friend, and have great sympathy for the position in which he finds himself. He and I have had to take some pretty rough cases in court in the past, and he's drawn a few short straws recently in that regard. And he's done so with dignity, if I may say. But can I ask him just to take this away? Whatever one's views on the Prime Minister, and I accept the importance of the continuity of the government. In fact, there's no need for a general election at all, and plenty of precedent for that. But will he take away the serious question mark that many have as to how long a caretaker Prime Minister can remain in place when there is really concern as to whether the government could be fully and effectively banned? Might it not be in everybody's interest to speed up the transition as much as possibly can be done?
Leader. Sorry.
I thank my right honourable and learned friend for his kind remarks. He's right, of course, that a general election is not constitutionally necessary. The Prime Minister was before the liaison committee yesterday and said as much. And we will await events. I cannot preempt the Prime Minister's statement.
Mr. Carmichael.
Mr. Speaker, can I say I'm delighted to hear the Minister speaking positively about the role of the civil service. It contrasts rather well with the way in which the government in recent years have done nothing but traduce and undermine their position. But I have to say to the Minister, the Prime Minister could not remain as a caretaker. That is just putting the bull in charge of the china shop. And this is not all about ministers and politicians. This is about our constituents and the public services on which they depend and for which now months this government has been unable to deliver for them properly. That's why they all need to go.
The substantive matter that the honourable gentleman mentions is not a matter for me, but I will say that ministers on this bench and in this House will serve the Crown and serve this country as they always have done.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his statement. I'm glad, without wishing to preempt the Prime Minister, I'm glad he has finally come to his senses and will be making this statement shortly. I am very, very sad that in the last 48 hours, so many honourable and right honourable colleagues have felt the need to resign from government. If those people will not serve this Prime Minister, could I ask my honourable friend to convey to the Prime Minister that it will not be tenable for him to continue as a caretaker if he cannot fill the ministerial appointments he needs to?
Minister.
I'm sure my friend's comment has been noted.
Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a great relief that we will no longer have a Prime Minister who keeps on saying things that turn out subsequently to be untrue. Will the Minister reassure us that the change will take place in hours, not months? And does the Minister recognise that effective democracy depends on ministers telling the truth?
I can only say that the Prime Minister will make a statement shortly.
It's a matter offered.
By those who enthusiastically supported decisions such as voting for Owen Paterson shows how they were unfit to serve as ministers in the beginning. But the governance of this country cannot be allowed to fail. So I would like to ask, when are these vacancies going to be filled? They must be filled immediately, and we cannot allow decisions to be made by other Secretaries of State from other departments. The country deserves better than that.
The government will continue to function, and I have spoken to the head of the civil service to that effect.
Dr. Ruperhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Independent reports that the PM and Tory ministers resigning are entitled to £420,000 of severance pay. At the same time, we've got a government gripped by paralysis and we have a cost of living crisis. Can he confirm now from that dispatch box that they will be forfeiting their right to this? Because we do not reward failure.
The matter that the Honourable Lady refers to is set in statute. So it is a matter for the law, and that law would have been passed by this House.
Rachel McLean.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It was an enormous honour to serve as a Minister in the Home Office until yesterday, tackling violence against women and girls. I know that's a cause that all members of this House care deeply about. While we are discussing these matters, victims of rape, sexual assault, stalking and spiking continue to deserve justice, and they will continue to be victims of crime. Will my right honourable friend give his continued support to the vital work of Operation Soteria and the rape review? Will he join me to put on record my thanks to Detective Chief Constable Maggie Blythe, Chief Constable Sarah Crew, Assistant Commissioner Louisa Rolfe and many other serving senior police officers who I know will capably continue to drive forward this work? And will he also thank the civil servants in the Home Office who I know will continue to do this essential work?
I understand it's good to get on record, but there's a lot of other people I've got to try and get in. Minister.
I will do as she says, and I also commend her for her championship of this very important area. The rate review and the work thereof should, of course, continue.
John Cryer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been times, occasionally, when Prime Ministers have been temporarily incapacitated. There has never been a period in British history where a government has been incapacitated across every department of state. We've just heard how the secret services are being undermined by the current situation, putting national security at risk. At what point is the government going to actually start functioning again?
Well, that is the debate that's been going on in the House of Commons with that urgent questioning on the functioning of government. Well, I am going to be back here a little bit later this afternoon, but I'm going to be handing over to my colleague Hugh Edwards as we await the announcement, the confirmation that Boris Johnson is going to resign. We are expecting possibly, of course, a podium to be brought out in front of Downing Street. There's a huge number of assembled press and journalists, as you can imagine, for this momentous event. Finally, after days of pressure, hours of intense pressure, Boris Johnson is going to step down. We'll bring you continued reaction now and go to John Maguire, who's on College Green.
Well, that news of the Prime Minister's impending resignation only around 2 hours old now. People still digesting it, but inevitably in politics, as in so many other walks of life, the first reaction is, oh really, and then the second reaction is, what's next, and indeed, who's next? Let's talk to Stuart Andrew. Good morning. A backbench MP as of now, but this time yesterday, well, yesterday certainly, a housing minister, one of those who chose to resign. Why did you decide to write that letter of resignation?
I think ultimately, I consider myself to be someone who thinks that loyalty and unity are really important in politics, and I perhaps allowed that probably to wrestle with my conscience for a bit too long. I ultimately then made the decision yesterday that this just wasn't sustainable. I think, trust and integrity in politics are really important, and I was thinking about my volunteers who go out canvassing week after week and thinking, what are they going to say on the doorstep? And I just couldn't countenance that anymore. And so I felt it was time for me to hand in my resignation.
And you're of course right that trust and integrity are essential in politics, but you talk about the doorstep. We frequently hear people tell us that they don't trust politicians, and events like these cause, not want to say irreparable damage to the brand as it were, but they are extremely damaging.
They are damaging, but what we've done in the past as a party is we have decided, who our next leader is. We've united behind them, and I think we will do that again, because there are some really serious issues that need addressing in this country. There is a really good, positive agenda on levelling up places that have been forgotten for decades. And of course we have to get our economy functioning effectively again. So these are things that we can rally behind, and I hope that we go through this process of the leadership election now, and we focus on who the new leader will be, and then we make sure that we unite behind them, run the country well, and hopefully lead us to victory at the next election.
Who should that be?
Well, I'm waiting to see the list. I suspect that it's going to be quite a long list to start with. But I'm keen to hear what each of those candidates wants to offer to the party, but more importantly to the country, and what their agenda is going to be. And I will listen very closely to what they have to say before making a decision, because it is important that we get the right person in place. And I think we're fortunate that we have a host of people who can be really good candidates. So it's going to be, I think, quite a tough choice, if I'm being honest.
Has your phone been ringing already to try to garner your support?
So no, I've had some nice positive text messages, right, but nothing so explicit at this stage, and I suspect that will change probably within the next 12 hours. And I'm open to listening to people, to hear what they have to say, what their thoughts are, and how they will address some of the really pressing needs of the country.
So what type of person, let's put it that way, what type of person should be the next, not only Conservative leader, but obviously Prime Minister, considering, remembering, bearing in mind what has happened over the last few months?
I think it has to be someone who frankly has thought about some of the social injustices that happen in the country, is keen on that levelling up agenda, because I think that is one of the important legacies of Boris Johnson, and we must continue that agenda. And I want someone also who's going to be really serious about bringing stability to the economy, so that people's cost of living issues are properly addressed, because I am really worried about how people are struggling at the moment, and we have to focus on that. But I suspect that we have a range of candidates that could do that very effectively.
You're a housing minister. Housing is, many will argue, at crisis point in this country and has been for very many years. So a serious, proper job. I assume you would have spent all day today working on your housing brief, but you're not doing anything. So that goes to tell us something, doesn't it, about the sort of how high the stakes are and what the problems are with what we've seen over the last few days.
Yeah, it's not ideal, and I have to say one of the things I was wrestling with was the fact that I would have to give up a job that frankly I loved doing, and I was very fortunate to work with some fantastic officials within the department, supported brilliantly by a private office, but also the wider sector. And do you know what, as I went around the country, what really struck me was that everybody was bought into that levelling up agenda, and housing was a key element of that. And I hope that, you know, we can get back to focusing on that now, whoever that will be, and continuing that agenda, because it is important that government functions, and that's what we've got to focus on now.
Because lots of people talk about this as the Westminster bubble, that there's all of this backbiting, people describing other people, colleagues, as snakes, for example. It feels a little bit like playground, school ground politics at times, but the job that you are doing really makes a difference to people's lives.
It certainly does, and you know, I think we have a really important positive agenda when it comes to housing. It's about making sure the planning system is fit for purpose, and that communities will identify where houses should be built, so that you get that local support, but also that the condition of people's housing is of good quality. Too many people are living in housing that isn't up to scratch. That's not on, and that's not fair, and we had a really quite important agenda to address that, and you know, I hope that the focus will return to that in the coming days.
All right. Thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Good to talk to you, and interesting also considering there has been so much discussion today about the mechanism of government, about whether or not the government was managing to continue business as usual. Hard to think that could be the case. That's definitely the point that's been put by the government in the House of Commons today. But as we see, former ministers who all of a sudden over the last 24, 48 hours have given up their jobs, and their lives have changed, and of course the lives that they're trying to change have been affected as well. That's the latest then from College Green. Back to you, Hugh, in Downing Street.
It is 11 o'clock. You're watching BBC News. We're live in Downing Street, where Boris Johnson will resign later today. The Conservative Party will be electing a new leader who will take over as Prime Minister, possibly in the autumn. Now, it comes after the new Chancellor told the Prime Minister to resign following a wave of resignations, mounting pressure from other senior Conservatives.
What's happened is ministers have seen, well, they've referred to a lack of honesty and integrity, and we clearly can't have that. And it's much better the PM goes now than dragging on to the Privileges Committee, potentially finding that he'd knowingly misled the House, because that would have been a disaster too.
Buckingham Palace has declined to comment on whether the Queen has had any communication with the Prime Minister during the morning. A very good morning from Westminster, and indeed from outside number 10 Downing Street, on what promises to be a memorable and momentous day. Boris Johnson has decided he can no longer continue as leader of the Conservative Party and therefore as Prime Minister, after a series of ministerial resignations this morning, which included that of the Northern Ireland Secretary Brandon Lewis and the Education Secretary of one day, Michelle Donnellan. Mr Johnson let it be known that he would be resigning as leader sometime today, and that he plans to remain in post until that new Prime Minister, the successor, is chosen. He's broken quite a few records in the past 24 hours. More than 50 ministers and party officials and aides have stepped down over the past few days, citing the Prime Minister's lack of integrity, as some see it, and competence. We're expecting a statement from Boris Johnson here in Downing Street at some point later. Now, just before we get on to talk to some of the parliamentary colleagues of Mr Johnson's, to ask them what they think is going to happen. I'm joined now in Downing Street by our political editor, Chris Mason. Chris, it's been a very busy and eventful morning already, but let's just underline what's going on so that those viewers joining us are very clear. The Prime Minister, as you hinted last night very clearly, is to go.
He is. Yeah, so we should pull apart here what he is intending to resign from and not in the short term. So Boris Johnson has decided this morning he is to resign as Conservative Party leader today, but crucially not as Prime Minister. There always has to be a Prime Minister. He is saying he will carry on as Prime Minister for the time it takes the Conservative Party to elect a new leader. And the time frame that Downing Street envisage is one where there'll be a new Prime Minister in post by the time of the Conservative Party conference. That starts at the beginning of October. And the intention from Boris Johnson, deciding what to do as he was over breakfast this morning, is that he will carry on in the interim. Now, since that announcement, or that briefing to me at just after 9 o'clock, there have been people within the Conservative Party and on the opposition benches saying, is that tenable? There are around 30 vacancies in government at the moment. The very functioning of government is a live question at the moment. So would it not be better, argue some, for there to be an interim Prime Minister over the summer who then gives way to the newly elected Conservative leader and Prime Minister in October? Just been told in the last couple of minutes, Hugh, that we will get announcements coming in the coming minutes about new cabinet positions. In other words, the intention in there right now is that they are going to prove, they hope, that they can assemble under Boris Johnson's leadership a coherent and functioning temporary government that will run the country until October, whilst others say he should stand down as Prime Minister as well as resigning as Conservative Party leader.
So that's a tricky situation. The assumption, I suppose, being in there that people who may not want to serve under Boris Johnson will nonetheless do so because they feel it's their duty to keep government going.
Exactly. And I think the key thing that we're attempting to measure today is to what extent has Boris Johnson lanced to the boil of anger amongst his Conservative colleagues by saying, OK, I get it, I don't have a long-term future as Prime Minister, I'm going to resign as your party leader, but what about the argument, which will be made today, that in the short term, in a period of huge instability, an element of stability would be the Prime Minister who's been the Prime Minister for the last few years, carrying on for a few more months, rather than somebody new coming in, trying to work out how to do the job, a big job, we should emphasise, before someone else was to take over. So that's where the argument is playing out right now, and they're confident at the moment that having said what he has said this morning, there'll be enough people who don't want him to stick around as Prime Minister, but would be happy to serve for a period of a few months.
It raises lots of questions, Chris, to say the least. Obviously, we'll need to wait to see exactly what the Prime Minister says when we expect him to appear here in the next hour, maybe maybe an hour and a half.
Yeah.
We don't know the time yet, precisely. But I'm just wondering what the public makes of this. We've had this array of Conservative MPs and former ministers saying that they don't think he's fit to be Prime Minister. They question his integrity, they question his honesty, they question his competence. Are the viewers, therefore, are the voters going to just understand that people are therefore happy to step into government with him again for a period of months? It's quite a big thing for people to take on.
It is. And if we take just a couple of steps back, so is the idea that a man who won a general election with a stonking majority 2.5 years ago, biggest Conservative majority in a very long time, should find himself in the predicament that he is in, for all of the reasons that you set out, in a relatively short period of time. And when we were talking on the news at 10 last night, we were hearing, weren't we, from in there, the argument that said they appealed to the mandate the party had secured under his leadership just 2.5 years ago. Equally, yes, of course, our viewer might ask, well, hang on a minute, if people have considered and concluded within the Conservative Party that he really ought to go, can he sustainably carry on until the autumn? I think in a practical sense, Hugh, the crucial test there is, can he assemble a government? That's question one. And they're going to endeavour to prove that, I think, in the coming hours. In fact, I'm just going to have a look in my inbox and see if I've received anything in the last few minutes. I haven't as yet.
So we're just seeing images there, Chris, of Boris Johnson visiting a medical facility, a testing and vaccination centre. And that, of course, is one of the elements of policy that he's really underlining and saying, well, OK, you may have questions about my performance in some areas, but on the big issue of COVID, for example, he maintains he's done a good job, and some of his own colleagues also maintain that he's done a good job. There are plenty of other areas, of course, where that isn't the case being made by those colleagues and former colleagues. What do you expect him to be able to say when he appears later about the reasons he's going? Now, that's the crucial thing. What will he acknowledge to people, to voters, those who voted for him in 2019? What will he acknowledge as some of the reasons why he's having to leave?
So I'm speculating now rather than knowing for certain what he will say, but I would have thought he will say, look, what was the central plank of his pitch to be elected, re-elected as Prime Minister in 2019? It was that phrase, wasn't it? Getting Brexit done. Now, my goodness, we can have, and we regularly do, have long discussions about the elements of around Brexit, not least the Northern Ireland Protocol, that remain very problematic. But in a legal sense, he did deliver on that promise. A period of huge noise at Westminster and a lack of resolution about the UK's departure from the European Union was delivered after the big mandate that he got in 2019. He also made a promise to the Conservative Party that he could win in a way that others hadn't been able to, and he was able to do that. But his party then concluded that he was a great campaigner but not great in government. That was the view of so many within the Conservative Party, and that he had delivered what they had wanted him to deliver. Plenty of Conservatives were always very clear-eyed when they selected him as party leader about his strengths and about his weaknesses. And in many senses, and perhaps it's the case of all of us as characters, our strengths can be our weaknesses and vice versa. And I think that's the kind of conclusion that Conservatives have come to. They now have a profound responsibility, both Conservative MPs here at Westminster, then the Conservative Party membership around the UK, around about 100,000 people, by definition a tiny sliver of the UK population, and also by definition an a representative sliver, because they are card-carrying members of a single political party. They have the awesome responsibility in the coming months of selecting a new Prime Minister on behalf of the rest of the country.
Let's pause for a second, because what I want to do is bring in one of the people you've just mentioned, one of the Conservative MPs, and we're going to talk to Chris Phelp, who actually resigned, I think, this morning. I'm just trying to keep track of all the list of resignations, but Conservative MP for Croydon South. Chris, thanks for joining us. Just remind us again why you decided that you needed to resign, I think, as Technology Minister, yes?
That's right. I resigned very early this morning as Minister for Technology and the Digital Economy. I'd been agonising over this for a time. I obviously felt personal loyalty to the Prime Minister who had appointed me. I was very, very respectful of the fact he got a general election mandate. I was also working on some important projects in government, a review of the gambling legislation, which is due to come out very imminently, and the online safety bill to keep our citizens, particularly children, safe online. It's coming back to the Commons for report stage next week. So I was very mindful of my duty to do those things, but eventually I felt the questions touching on ethics and integrity and the functioning of our constitution were just so overwhelming that for me the elastic snapped, and that's why I resigned this morning. And I sent a message to the Prime Minister, very respectfully and politely, suggesting that he should go. But I reached that decision, sorrowfully, reluctantly. Took me a while to get there, as you will have seen or gathered, but I think it was the right thing.
When you mentioned ethics and integrity, at what point did your concerns kick in about Mr. Johnson? Have they been there for months, or, what kind of timescale are we talking about here?
Well, I think I was very perturbed by the whole Owen Paterson situation last, whenever it was, October, and I made my views very forcefully known to the Whip's office at the time. But I think, we know what the issues are. We don't need to rehearse them again. And that's why I made the decision I did this morning. But we should, I think, just keep in mind Boris's achievements, that landslide election victory, getting Brexit done against the odds, the vaccine rollout. And we've got, more people in payroll employment than ever before. So he's got some fantastic achievements. And I think we should just keep those in mind, as well, obviously, as the issues that have led us to where we are now.
Do you think it's appropriate for him to stay in office as Prime Minister until the autumn? Is that something that you think voters will understand?
Well, I haven't really got my head around that question, to be honest. Obviously, traditionally, Prime Ministers, when they've gone, have stayed on in a caretaker capacity. Theresa May did that, so did David Cameron. I understand people will say these circumstances are a bit different, but I haven't really got a strong view. I haven't got my head around the question, to be honest. I'm just sad not to be working on those projects I mentioned, the gambling review and the online safety bill, which I think are really important for the UK, but ultimately the decision I made was that the wider considerations outweighed them.
OK, well, you've made that point very clear, Chris, and viewers have heard that. I'm just going back to that question I asked earlier, because it is a crucial question this morning. and it is a debate that's ongoing, as you will be more aware than anyone else as a Conservative MP. If you're really pressed on this by colleagues of yours and asked, do you think that there should be a caretaker Prime Minister in the next few months, or do you think Mr Johnson should stay in Downing Street until the autumn, what would your answer to that be?
Well, I've already said I haven't really got my head around the question. I can't see an immediate reason not to follow the precedent I mentioned earlier. The most important thing is we manage to keep the government functioning on a day-to-day level. There are obviously some departments that have no ministers, DFE for example, so we need to get that sorted out pretty quickly. I think we need the leadership election and process should happen, I think, as quickly as it reasonably can. We've got to make sure we make the right choice, but we should do it as quickly as we're reasonably able to, so we can bring the party together and move on, because there are around about 2 years left on this mandate. We should serve the British people and get done all the important things that we're doing. I've mentioned a few of them, I won't repeat them, but we need to keep that in mind and make sure we're delivering for the public. That is the priority after all.
But just thinking about viewers watching this, many of whom will have voted for Mr Johnson back in 2019, you are saying very openly, and you have done repeatedly, your letter was very clear, you have concerns about the Prime Minister's ethics and integrity, and yet you're happy for him to stay in office for another few months. What are people to make of that? How are they to understand that?
Well, I think there's a big difference between being a Prime Minister, and he was talking a few weeks ago about serving until the 2030s, versus just acting in a caretaker capacity for a short period of time, not introducing new policy, not introducing new legislation. Theresa May did it at the end of her time in office. Obviously, there were different issues there, but I mean, if you think about the last days of Theresa May's time in office, it wasn't a particularly happy situation. So, look, there is precedent, but the main thing we need to do is make sure the government functions on a day-to-day basis. The legislation that's in flight needs to be completed. We need to make sure the basic machinery of government works, get a new leader elected, bring the party and country together and move on. That's what we need to do. But we should also just respectfully keep in mind what Boris has achieved, because he has achieved some impressive things and we shouldn't forget that.
Just very briefly, Chris, if I may, just to end, is there someone who commends themselves to you, to the post of Prime Minister, somebody who you consider to be an outstanding candidate?
I haven't given that any thought. I only resigned from the government 4 hours ago, so I haven't thought about it. I was literally up to my elbows in technical detail on the online safety bill until 8 o'clock this morning, so I haven't given that any thought.
OK, you've not given that any thought at all, Chris Philp. Thank you very much. The former Minister and Conservative MP, Chris Philp, thanks to him for joining us. Right, well, let's at this moment, it's 11:15, just bringing you up to date if you're just joining us here on BBC News. We're expecting a statement from the Prime Minister, the outgoing Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and the outgoing leader of the Conservative Party here in Downing Street sometime in the next maybe hour and a half. I actually don't know, I'm just guessing, but that's the kind of timing we're working to. And in the meantime, of course, a sharp eye is being kept on all of this across the UK. Yes, we're in the middle of the Westminster bubble here, but what happens here in Downing Street will have a huge impact, of course, as well in terms of politics and policy across the UK. So with that in mind, we're going to cross to Bute House in Edinburgh, where Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has been making her views clear about what's been going on and talking to BBC Scotland's political correspondent, Phil Sim.
Well, the chaos and complete lack of integrity that has characterised Boris Johnson's premiership has in the last few days descended into complete and utter farce, and all at a time when people in every part of the UK are really struggling with very real challenges. So I think first and foremost there will be an overwhelming and very widespread sense of relief today that Boris Johnson's time as Prime Minister, which should probably never have been allowed to happen in the first place, is coming to an end. I do think it is quite incredible, though, to suggest that he will remain as Prime Minister for another 3 to 4 months. I think the sooner he is out of number 10, and preferably that is today, the better. For Scotland, though, we're going to see in the next few months one Prime Minister that we did not vote for, replaced by yet another Prime Minister that we did not vote for and would not vote for, even if given the chance. This is about so much more than one individual. For Scotland, the Westminster system doesn't represent our best interests, and that is why we don't just need a change of Prime Minister or a wider changing of the guard at Westminster. I think Scotland needs a permanent alternative to Westminster, which is why the independence choice is so necessary.
So you say you shouldn't stay on as an interim Prime Minister. Does that mean Dominic Raab would be your man for the job?
Well, I wouldn't choose any of the Conservatives as Prime Minister. I wouldn't choose to have a Conservative government. Scotland hasn't chosen to have a Conservative government. So this is not really about my ideal scenario, but I do think, given that Boris Johnson has so clearly lost the confidence of the UK, and I think that's been the case for some time according to not just opinion polls but recent by-elections, but he has also lost the confidence of the House of Commons and his own party. It is just, I think, an unsustainable proposition to say that he will continue to inhabit number 10 for 3 to 4 months, particularly given the character and personality of Boris Johnson. I'm not sure that anybody could look at Boris Johnson and conclude that he is capable of genuinely behaving as a caretaker Prime Minister. He will want to do things, and in the process of that, undoubtedly cause even more chaos than he has already. So the interests of people in all parts of the UK surely must be to bring this farce to an end, and to bring it to an end without any further delay. But the very idea that you're putting that legitimate question to me, if not Boris Johnson, then who? Is it Dominic Raab? For me, really does underline this point. Scotland wouldn't choose any of these people to be Prime Minister. And that's the problem here. We're looking at this Westminster system and the chaotic Westminster system that it's become, and it doesn't represent what Scotland, or a majority of people in Scotland, want, believe or value. And that's not going to change with the departure of Boris Johnson. The Westminster system is broken, and it's that system that we need an alternative to for Scotland, because inherent in it is a very, very profound democratic deficit.
Nicola Sturgeon there, the First Minister of Scotland, talking just a short while ago up in Edinburgh, and really making her views very clear about this change, which we're looking at today, and making the point that, from her point of view, that the policy is the problem, not really the personality in many ways, that they question the policy and approach to devolved issues, and indeed, of course, down the line to any potential future referendum on independence. Let's go over to the green outside Parliament and talk to the Conservative MP for Winchester, Steve Bryan. Steve, very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Would you be happy for the Prime Minister to stay on in Downing Street for another few months?
No, and I don't think my constituents will either. I've just been in the tea room in the House of Commons, and there is a gathering view. There are dissenters to that view, of course, that this is not really sustainable till the autumn, given the extent of the lack of confidence that the parliamentary parties expressed. But, you know, so it's not really for the Prime Minister to set that timetable, to be honest. You know, he's tendered his resignation as the leader of the Conservative Party, and it's now up to the 1922 committee to work out that process. And I know that they are meeting literally as we speak to talk about things like the threshold of the number of MPs that any candidate would need to get before they can put their name forward. You know, we can't just have a wacky races of 20 candidates here. We need those that are serious about being the next Prime Minister and actually have a chance of doing so, and doing so credibly.
What are you saying to colleagues of yours, such as Chris Philp, who was talking to us right in that spot just a few minutes ago, saying that there was no problem if the Prime Minister was just sort of, you know, caretaker in a sense for the next few months until a new leader was in place, that people would understand that, voters would understand that. You reject that case?
Well, I was standing right next to Chris when he said it. I mean, this is not looking after a Championship football club. This is no disrespect to a Championship football club. This is the government of the country. You know, this is the Prime Minister. And I mean, just listening, and I did catch the end of that interview there with the First Minister of Scotland, who of course wants to make this about, who knew, her pet subject, which is let's get out of the UK. If ever there was reason to get a grip and get things together, there's a really flashing example, isn't there, that you just heard there from Nicola Sturgeon.
I just looked at, I think it's your last tweet at the moment, Steve, which says, very proud of Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid this evening, so this is yesterday, albeit later than many of us would have liked. Now let's turn the page. So let's think about that mechanism of turning the page. What does the Prime Minister need to say when he makes a statement in a short while here in Downing Street?
Well, I think he needs to show some humility to the position that he's in. I think he quite rightly can point to a number of successes. He's served as a public servant for a long time, obviously as Mayor of London and as Prime Minister. He won a big mandate from the British public, and there are lots of successes, and Chris pointed to some of those in your previous interview that he can point to, but I think he needs to show humility and understanding that the game is up, as obviously he has now recognised. Clearly it isn't his choice. I don't think he's come to this conclusion. He's been told that by the men and women in grey suits. But you can't say what you said yesterday and then suddenly be okay with it today. So I just think he needs to strike the right tone as a leader that understands it's time to hand over the reins of power in a dignified way, because that's how we do it in this country. And then the parliamentary party needs to move on very, very quickly, and I think there is a huge appetite to move on quickly. If this was under the old rules, we would just be within the parliamentary party. We could have this done next week, and actually I think there's probably a lot of appetite for to see whether the parliamentary party could coalesce around a unity candidate. Appreciate that is easier said than done, given some of the ambitions we have around us. But for some colleagues who stayed lashed to this mast until the last possible minute, I think, putting it bluntly, Hugh, some people have doubts about their seriousness as a result of that.
Do you have any thoughts on succession, Steve? I know we haven't had the statement yet, but Chris Philp was suggesting that he hadn't even thought for a moment about that. I'm just wondering whether you have thoughts about the kind of person that should succeed, if you're not even asking you to name names, but the kind of person who should succeed.
Well, I mean, integrity needs to run through them, and I think that's pretty obvious. They need to restore trust and confidence in the office of Prime Minister, competence in the government. So, we've got big crises, obviously international and domestic, on the cost of living. But what's my caseload full of at the moment? People who can't get passports to go on their long planned and hoped for holiday that they've put off for the last 3 years. So, it's about getting a grip, and ultimately I think it's about saying to the lost Conservative voters, and they exist for the record in the Red Wall seats, in London, in the South East where I represent, it's about saying to those that they are that person, and it's the economy, and that matters in every single seat in the country. It's about making sure that we emerge from this crisis with a strong economy, because it's that through which we fund the public services, it's that through which we then have a vibrant economy and people have well-paid jobs. And whoever stands for the leadership, and nobody has obviously formally declared to that yet, sorry about the noise here, I'll be looking for that in the next leader.
Thanks, Steve. Very good to talk to you. Steve Bryan, the Conservative MP for Winchester, Chandler's Ford. Thanks to him. Chris Mason, our political editor, still with me, and more things to report.
Yeah, so just been told that a full cabinet has now been appointed and approved as is convention by the Queen. So we'll be getting announcements in the next few minutes as to who the new cabinet ministers are. Is there something of a reshuffle going on, or is it merely filling the various gaps that have opened up over the last 48 hours? So this is Number 10 trying to respond to the very argument that's just played out here on BBC News in the last few minutes as to whether or not Boris Johnson, for the next 3 months, July, August, September, can continue to run a functioning government as a standby Prime Minister until a new Conservative leader is elected in the autumn. That's the time frame Number 10, as things stand, is determined to stick to, and this briefing that a new cabinet is imminent and appointments have been made illustrates that desire that they want to carry on until the autumn.
The debate is raging, isn't it, about whether he can carry on?
Yeah.
And we've just had two opposite ends of the debate, two colleagues in the Commons, Conservative colleagues, really disagreeing fundamentally on whether that decision is the right and decent one to make. How will that be playing out now, given that the Prime Minister has to make a statement to the nation, within the next hour or so? Is that still going to be something that they're grappling with?
Well, they insist at the moment that they're pressing ahead with these cabinet appointments, and what you can read from that is a determination that they think they can make the case that they can assemble a functioning government, albeit, yes, led by a leader who is deeply unpopular within the Conservative Party. We know that, and he's resigning, in order to carry on until the autumn. But what we're already getting to, and it's extraordinary, is we're getting a similar argument to the one that we were hearing yesterday, but fought over a different contest. Yes. And that contest is whether or not he carries on for 3 months or he resigns as Prime Minister as well as Conservative Party leader, either today or in the coming days, and some sort of appointment of an interim Prime Minister for a period of a few months. Similar argument being played out, albeit over a very, very different issue. And I think we're going to see over the coming hours, just as we did this morning over the resignations that forced the Prime Minister's hand at just after 9 o'clock this morning, we're going to see over the coming hours, on our airwaves, I suspect, and privately, a sense of the extent to which it is sustainable for Boris Johnson to continue for the next 3 months.
So it is entirely possible that we'll all be here listening to the Prime Minister in a short while, making a statement explaining that he is going to resign eventually, but that he intends to hang on until the autumn. And then it's possible that, you know, while he thinks that'll tie up issues for today and for the next few weeks and so, that ignites an entirely new debate which will engulf the government potentially again.
Exactly. And I think we're seeing the beginnings of that. Those embers are burning this morning. We've seen it in the last 10 minutes, haven't we? So that conversation is absolutely happening, and they'll be trying to work out if their new position, very different position from the one they were defiantly sticking to last night, is sustainable for the next 3 months.
Chris, thanks very much. Chris Mason will talk to you in a while again. Chris, there, our political editor, of course, keeping on top of all of the developments here in Downing Street and over at Westminster. Well, let's take you to the House of Commons, where a short time ago, Labour's Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, who's been, of course, very prominent in the leading the case against Boris Johnson, she asked an urgent question about the functioning of government right now.
Without ministers, what are the arrangements to pass primary and secondary legislation, and who will answer oral questions? How will this government continue to be democratically held to account? With the new Education Secretary resigning after 36 hours, which must be a record, there is not a single member in the Department of Education. What does this mean for children taking their exams? What does this mean for the impending childcare cost crisis?
Angela Rayner, their Labour's Deputy Leader. Now, this goes right to the heart of the debate that lots of Conservative MPs are also having. It's not just a Labour case about the functioning of government. The case they're being made about how the Education Department can function without ministers in charge. One of the ministers who hasn't resigned is the Paymaster General, Michael Ellis, who replied saying that the government was still functioning.
I cannot preempt the Prime Minister's statement, and the House and the nation will hear more very shortly, but government and the civil service will continue to function in the meantime. The business of the House statement will be made shortly, and members can ask questions of the Leader of the House of Commons about the matter of the business of this place. But the House will continue to function and government business will continue to function. Other Secretaries of State can deal with issues for other departments constitutionally and legally in necessary circumstances.
Michael Ellis, the Conservative MP, Paymaster General, trying to insist that the government can still function despite the fact that there are so many vacancies caused, dozens of them in fact over the last 24, 36 hours or so. And as Chris Mason was telling us, we are expecting a list of the cabinet as it currently stands, given that of course there have been quite a few prominent moves there, including the sacking of Michael Gove last night by Boris Johnson. If you're just joining us here on BBC News, it's 11:30 and we are expecting Boris Johnson to announce in a short while that he is resigning as leader of the Conservative Party, and then in due course as Prime Minister, though the debate is raging around the extent to which the Prime Minister can stay on until the autumn and the party conference season, when there might be a handover. That debate is still raging today. I suspect that the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, has some rather strong views on that, and he joins us now from the Green outside Parliament. Ed, a very good morning. What are your thoughts on where we are now?
Well, you know, Liberal Democrats wanted the Prime Minister to resign months and months ago. We called on Conservative MPs to do that, and it's a real stain on the Conservative Party and every Conservative MP that they failed to act and allow this law-breaking, lying Prime Minister to stay in office. And the damage that it's caused, millions of families and pensioners around the country faced with the cost of living crisis, their failure to tackle the NHS with a long waiting list for cancer, for ambulances, for GP appointments. I mean, this has been a government in chaos. And because the Conservative Party still hasn't got a grip, we now have a government in chaos with no real government in place to tackle the problems facing our country.
That's precisely the case that the Prime Minister's supporters are making, Ed, which is that, yes, he's going to resign as Conservative Party leader, but they think he needs to stay in place as Prime Minister to continue government, to appoint people to vacant posts, to make sure that the government is functioning, as Michael Ellis was trying to make out just now. So does the functioning of government, does the whole kind of machinery of government come before anything else in your view?
No, this Prime Minister's got no confidence of his own party, of Parliament and of the British country. So the Prime Minister has to go today. It's quite possible to have an interim government. There's a Deputy Prime Minister, there could be a interim cabinet appointed, and so the business of government could continue. And the fact that Conservatives haven't got a grip is yet another accusation against the Conservatives' failure to lead our country. And what Liberal Democrats will be saying, as we've been saying for months now, is this Conservative Party, Boris Johnson or no Boris Johnson, is not fit to lead our country.
What do you say to those parliamentary colleagues of yours, but they are opponents, of course, Conservative MPs who have decided that they don't have a lot of time for Boris Johnson, but they feel that it is their duty to be filling those ministerial posts simply to keep things going? Are they right or wrong to do that?
Well, we need a government that's trying to sort out the problems of our country, but I'm afraid whether you're a Conservative minister who resigned or a Conservative minister who decided to stay, you still have to be held to account for allowing him to be there in the first place, and for the months and months that this incompetent, lying Prime Minister has misled our country. You know, when I talk to my constituents, when I went on the doorsteps in those by-elections, in those council elections where Liberal Democrats did so well, we had lifelong Conservatives saying they couldn't believe that the Conservatives were making such a mess of our country. When Liberal Democrats argued for a cut in tax to help people and the Conservatives refused to do that, lifelong Conservatives said, why aren't they listening to you, Liberal Democrats? Because you at least have a plan. So I'm afraid I can't give any credit to Conservative ministers who resigned or not. Frankly, they should get themselves a leader, do that as soon as they can, and then there should be a general election and we should get rid of a lot of them.
Sir Ed Davey, good to talk to you again. Thank you very much for joining us. The leader of the Liberal Democrats there, Sir Ed Davey. And let's go from one leader to another, because the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has been speaking a short while ago, and I think we can hear that now. Is he joining us?
He needs to go completely. None of this nonsense about clinging on for a few months. He's inflicted lies, fraud and chaos in the country. And, you know, we're stuck with a government which isn't functioning in the middle of a cost of living crisis. And all of those that have been propping him up should be utterly ashamed of themselves. We've had 12 years of a stagnant economy, 12 years of broken public services, 12 years of empty promises. Enough is enough. And the change we need is not a change at the top of the Tory party. It's much more fundamental than that. We need a change of government and a fresh start for Britain.
It doesn't look like he'll get a general election if he just swaps leaders.
He needs to go. He can't cling on in this way. His own party have finally concluded that he's unfit to be Prime Minister. They can't now inflict him on the country for the next few months. It's obvious he's unfit to be Prime Minister. That's been blindingly obvious for a very, very long time. And if they don't get rid of him, then Labour will step up in the national interest and bring a vote of no confidence, because we can't go on with this Prime Minister clinging on for months and months to come.
Wouldn't that unite the Conservative Party?
I don't think anything is going to unite this Conservative Party. They're tearing each other apart. And what we've got in the middle of a cost of living crisis is a government that can't function. And that's why I say he can't cling on now. They've declared him unfit to be Prime Minister. They can't inflict him on the country for the next few months. If they don't get rid of him, we will bring that vote of no confidence in the national interest, because we can't go on with this broken government led by this discredited Prime Minister.
Boris Johnson, in some ways, was your biggest asset if you were going to go to the country. When you lose him, you will have more of a problem, won't you?
Look, the Conservative Party has been in power for 12 years. 12 years of a stagnant economy. 12 years of broken public services. 12 years of empty promises. We need a fresh start. And that's why I say changing the person at the top of the Conservative Party is not the fundamental change that we need. We need a change of government. We need a fresh start for our country.
But it doesn't look like you will get the general election you would want now, does it?
Well, we need fundamental... The country's crying out for change. We've been stuck with a government that's not been functioning in the middle of a cost of living crisis. And now changing the person at the top of the Conservative Party is not going to make any difference whatsoever. People want change, a fresh start for Britain. And that means we need a change of government. We need a Labour government.
Is there nobody that you would rate as a good opponent? Someone will be in against you?
For me, this isn't a question about who leads the Conservative Party. It's much more fundamental than that. They've been in power for 12 years of empty promises, broken promises, a stagnant economy, wages very, very low, inflation and prices through the roof. We need fundamental change. We need a fresh start for Britain. We need a change of government. We need a Labour government.
Lastly, I just want to ask you, given what you say about the government, you haven't cut through as you might want to. How can you do something about that now?
We've come from a general election in 2019 where we did very badly, to local elections this year where we made considerable ground, and a by-election win 2 weeks ago today in Wakefield with a huge swing to the Labour Party. So we're on track, and that's why we say the change we need is a change of government, a Labour government. We're ready for that.
Thank you.
Sir Keir Starmer there, the Labour leader, giving his forthright view on the change that he thinks that the UK needs right now. Chris Mason still with me, our political editor. Latest developments.
So no appointments as yet announced to the Cabinet. I'm being told, as we were saying a few minutes ago, that because Boris Johnson is determined to carry on as Prime Minister until the autumn, whilst a new Conservative leader is elected, he is going to assemble, and has assembled, I'm told, a full Cabinet to start making the argument that he can run a functioning government. There's quite a few other ministerial vacancies he will need to resolve below the Cabinet level in order to make that argument as fulsomely as he would hope to. No public announcements yet as to who is doing which jobs. But it's fascinating hearing Sir Keir Starmer there, beginning to get an outline, the earliest of sketches of the coming political arguments. Yes, the immediate one about whether Boris Johnson carries on as Prime Minister for the next 3 months or not, but also crucially from his perspective, where the argument goes beyond that in the countdown to the next general election. Because suddenly Sir Keir Starmer, who in many ways politically has defined himself as being everything that Boris Johnson isn't, is suddenly going to be confronted by a new opponent, and that will reshape, no doubt, Labour's strategy as they approach that general election. You heard the big picture argument he made about the duration of a Conservative government, but there is a lot of personality involved in the contest to become Prime Minister, and he seemed to face a new opponent.
Well, it was interesting yesterday, Chris. I bumped into a Labour MP who's a big ally of Keir Starmer's, saying that Well, yes, of course we think Boris Johnson should be out of office. We don't think he's fit to be Prime Minister. But a bit of us thinks maybe we'd like to keep him there because actually we see him as an electoral asset now in a way that he was certainly an electoral opponent of some force 3 years ago.
Exactly. And that's, of course, what was driving and motivating so many of the Conservative MPs who wanted rid of Boris Johnson, because they agreed with the private reflections of Labour MPs that Boris Johnson, in their view, had become a liability, and therefore, for their own sake and the sake of their party, they felt they had to get rid of him. So it entirely changes the political conversation and dynamic. Although, as I say, I'm getting ahead of myself. We're imagining a situation in October or November when we're not certain, absolutely certain, given the debate that is raging this morning, who will be Prime Minister over the summer ahead of the election of whoever the next longer term.
I'm sorry about that. We seem to be having some technical difficulties down there in Westminster. As you can imagine, we have camera crews and teams right across Westminster, right across the country, in fact, gathering reaction and analysis to significant events there in Westminster. I think we have re-established the line so we can cross back to Hugh Edwards in Downing Street for us now. Hi, Hugh.
Lewis, thanks very much indeed, and apologies everyone for that. Little glitch in the system, but we're back safe and sound with Chris here in Downing Street. Just saying, question of psychology from one Member of Parliament saying, why would he want to stay? He's been humiliated, said this MP. He's been forced out, in effect. Make no secret about that. So why would he want to stay there for another few months? Is it just to be Prime Minister for another few months? Is that it?
Well, that might be part of it. And I suppose for somebody who has aspired to always do this job for so long and is leaving much, much, much earlier than he would have anticipated given the size of his majority at the last general election, on a human level, I suspect that might be a motivating factor. I think the other factor that is likely to be in the minds of those in there making this argument to the country shortly and to Conservative MPs already is one of trying to find in a sea of instability a slither of stability, which would be the argument that says, OK, you elected this party with this leader a couple of years ago, you're soon going to get a new Prime Minister. Do you want a third person occupying that role in 2022 ahead of the election of a new Conservative leader, a new Prime Minister in the autumn? So I suppose that will be the essence of the argument that they make. But ultimately, there's two tests of it. The practical one, can they assemble a functioning government? The political one, does the Conservative Party buy it?
One other point, Chris, just now before we deal with something else, which is the kind of leader that the Parliamentary Party will want. Now, you know the Parliamentary Party very well, and you know the kind of different shades of colour within that Parliamentary Party. What kind of person will they want? Will they want somebody who's strikingly different in terms of style? Will they want somebody who's a little more maybe business-like, maybe a little more serious as they'd see it, but maybe then having less of an electoral pizzazz around them? Where are we?
So I think we're certain to end up with a new Prime Minister who isn't as big a character as Boris Johnson, such as the outsized personality of our current Prime Minister. But then there's an argument that will rage within the Conservative Party about the outlook of that new Prime Minister. The Conservative Party has changed radically, the Parliamentary Party, in the last couple of years. So many who regarded it as their home for a long time, driven out amid all of those Brexit arguments and indeed the arrival of Boris Johnson. Are you possessing news there?
I think that you and I have probably both got this, which is that we have an appointment instead of Michael Gove, and it is that the Right Honourable Greg Clark, it's a bit of a surprise addition at this point. Greg Clark has agreed to be appointed as Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, replacing Michael Gove, who was sacked yesterday. Greg Clark, of course, being a very experienced operator and a previous minister.
Indeed, and if I recall this rightly, grew up on Teesside. He is now an MP in Kent, but can make that argument that in those parts of the country where that crucial policy around levelling up is seen to be so important, Teesside becomes something of a electoral success story for the Conservatives in recent years, with the Mayor Ben Houchen doing so well in a collection of seats that were long-standing Labour seats being won by the Conservatives, not least Simon Clarke, who has served in government pretty prominently recently directly in the Treasury. So that's the first of several appointments to come. The thing that I'll be intrigued by, Hugh, is the extent to which this is merely an exercise in filling gaps, or if there is a wider reshuffle, and what the view is of those cabinet ministers who didn't resign yesterday but did tell the Prime Minister he should resign. Are they willing to serve in the interim, given that he's acknowledged that he is due to go? And there's some evidence that some of them are willing to do that.
And another one, Chris, do you have this one? It's just come up now. This is Kit Malthouse, who becomes Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. That, of course, is the Cabinet Office.
That's right. And so Kit Malthouse, long-standing ally of the Prime Minister, was in the London Assembly when Boris Johnson was the Mayor of London, has served as a policing minister, Home Office minister in the past. So an ally of the Prime Minister who it wouldn't be surprising is up for supporting him over the next couple of months.
So do these fit into the category of people who would agree to serve because they think it's the right thing to do? Kit Malthouse has been a big ally of the Prime Minister's, as you say. Would Greg Clark be serving because he thinks it's just his duty to do it?
Yeah, I suspect so. I think it probably, an invitation to join the Cabinet, albeit a short-term appointment, quite possibly, or most certainly, unless the successor was to decide to take them on. And that argument that you come in to government and into politics for public service, and clearly these are unorthodox moments, but the motivation, I suspect, of Mr Clark and Mr Malthouse would be exactly that. I can bring you one additional bit of news. James Cleverly being appointed as Education Secretary.
Interesting.
The previous Education Secretary, Michelle Donnellan, in post for 35 hours, I was calculating this morning, appointed by Boris Johnson just the other night. Within just over 24 hours was calling for the resignation of the very man who had appointed her. She must barely have stepped through the front door of the department of which she was the Secretary of State for a matter of those 35 hours. James Cleverly, another long-standing Conservative, again has history with the Prime Minister back in the London Assembly, MP for Braintree in Essex, has served in various portfolios around government, now rising up to a cabinet position.
OK, so we've had three there, haven't we, at least. So we'll be back, Chris, when the others pop up, and then we'll try to find out a little more for everyone at home about when we might expect to see the Prime Minister popping out of the door. The clue, of course, as you all know at this stage, is that the lectern will appear, and then we'll know something's happening. But so far, there's no lectern, so it's a little bit away again. I'd be amazed if it goes on beyond lunchtime, but look, we've been proved wrong in the past. So at this stage, we're simply trying to gauge what's happening inside with the functioning of government and whether these jobs, all of them, the vacancies announced yesterday, can be filled in good time. And indeed, what Conservative MPs are making of the Prime Minister's plan to stay in office until the autumn, until a successor is appointed. So how's the news about Boris Johnson being greeted away from Westminster? We're going to join our correspondent, Andrew Plant, who is in Cheltenham. And Andrew, what's going on there?
Yeah, Hugh, we've been chatting to people here in Cheltenham this morning. This was for decades a very safe Liberal Democrat seat. They won it, in fact, from the Conservatives at the general election back in 1992, and they held it for 22 years, all the elections during that time, until, of course, that crucial election back in 2015, when the Conservatives won it back, when they took so many seats that they perhaps weren't expecting to across the UK. But ever since then, in every subsequent election, that margin that they had in 2015 has got thinner. Back then, it was 6,000, their majority out of about 80,000 registered voters. In 2017, that had slimmed down to about 2,000, and then most recently, in 2019, it was under 1,000, the winning margin here, about 900 votes. So this is one of those places in the UK where every single vote will count, and we have been talking to people here about exactly what they make of events in Downing Street over the past 48 hours.
I'm disgusted with the politics in this country. I'm disgusted with the government, the cabinet, the conduct of them. They have no scruples, they have no morals, they have no integrity. And the lies that have come since Boris went on his campaign, it's just astounding.
There are a lot of very loyal Tory members of the government who would normally have supported Boris, but where it all stems from, I don't know whether it goes back to his partying days at Eton or what, but He's a little bit of a risk taker. We've needed that at times to get us through the various stages that were coming up against a brick wall, but I feel now that too many people have lost faith in his ability to steer us through in an honest and open way.
Well, he's left it too late, but we haven't got nobody that comes to mind to take over because nobody is fit enough to do the job.
Yeah, some really interesting opinions from people here this morning. I think what was clear is that it didn't matter who we stopped, everybody had something to say. There wasn't a single person we met here at all who hadn't been following pretty closely what had been going on in Downing Street over the past couple of days. Now, the sitting MP here, of course, is Alex Chalk. And he is part of the interesting question which is being addressed, presumably, behind that door in Downing Street right now, because he resigned, of course, less than 48 hours ago from his job under Boris Johnson as Solicitor General. Now, part of the big question at the moment is, of all the resignations we've had over the past couple of days, more than 50, of course, and all those jobs that have now been left vacant and that you need to fill to have effectively a functioning government, what is going to happen there? Can you get all the people who resigned to then come back if Boris Johnson says in the next hour, as we expect, that he will stay on for perhaps 2 or 3 months while there is another leadership contest for the summer? Will those people who've left their jobs then agree to come back and fill those positions again? People like Alex Chalk, the Cheltenham MP. Or, as some people are saying, will there be calls for Boris Johnson to go earlier and for somebody else to become what would effectively be a caretaker Prime Minister?
Andrew, many thanks. Andrew Plant there for us with the views in Cheltenham, and we'll have more views from different parts of the UK as we go through the day. Let's put today's events then in a bit of a wider context. We're going to join Professor Tim Bale, political scientist, political historian. Tim, a very good morning, still just about good morning. What do you make of what's going on today, and what is the parallel? Is there a clear parallel with a previous prime ministerial resignation that might help us understand what's going on with this one?
I don't think we've ever seen a Prime Minister having to be told in such public terms by his or her colleagues that they needed to go. Clearly, we've had Prime Ministers before, Margaret Thatcher and indeed Theresa May, who were told by colleagues that the game was up, but in nothing like the same public deputation way that we saw yesterday and indeed this morning. So I think that truly is unprecedented. I think the Conservative Party does face actually a really difficult decision about Boris Johnson over the next 2 or 3 months. You talked about a caretaker Prime Minister. Boris Johnson himself would be expected to be no more than a caretaker Prime Minister. Is he the kind of safe pair of hands who can just be left to get on with running the shop, as it were, while the leadership contest takes place? Or are Conservative MPs afraid that he might act in ways that resemble some of the things he's been doing over the last few days, in which case probably he's not the man for that job?
That's the debate, Tim, really, isn't it? It is the one that is likely to bubble on throughout today, certainly. We'll wait to see what Mr Johnson himself has to say in the statement that he'll make shortly, we think. But clearly, he wants to stay on as Prime Minister until the autumn. I'm just thinking, what challenges does that pose in terms of the functioning of government? If he can prove that he can populate all these ministries with people who are happy to serve, is there really a fundamental problem with him staying on in those circumstances?
Well, it slightly depends on what he wants to do. I think Theresa May, for example, found it actually quite difficult to get any of her agenda, or what was left of her agenda, through once it was clear that she was going to be replaced. Really, Boris Johnson will just have to keep the ship of state steady. Obviously, he can still do what he's been doing on Ukraine, but as far as economic policy, he will have to completely leave that to the Chancellor, I think. He can't have any say in really the running of that. He won't be able, in other words, to exercise the power and control over the agenda that one would expect from a Prime Minister.
which again brings us back to the question I was asking Chris Mason about earlier. What would motivate the Prime Minister, or Boris Johnson in this case, to stay on in those circumstances with his power very limited or restricted, or at least the potential for lots of conflict between him and civil servants and other ministers? It's a very complex situation to be looking ahead to.
Well, if I were flippant, I would say he might want to try and make up for the disaster of the last few days and show that he can actually be trusted as the chief executive of UK PLC, even if it's only for a few months. So he might hope that he can somehow undo the damage that he's done, to his reputation and indeed to the reputation of the Conservative Party over the last few days. It may well give him a few more pages for the last chapter of his prime ministerial memoirs, which is something I'm sure he will be thinking of as well. He must be thinking right now of his life after Downing Street, and his writing career will be very much part of that.
Can we think of another case of a Prime Minister who's won a pretty handsome majority at Westminster, in his case less than 3 years ago, who found themselves in the humiliating position that he's in today, that kind of decline over a relatively short space of time? Is that again a case unto itself?
No, it's not. I mean, you will, like me, remember Hugh, Margaret Thatcher, who won a thumping majority in 1987, and by 1989 she was in real trouble, and of course by 1990 she was gone. And even when we look at Tony Blair, he won a decent majority of 60-something in 2005. By 2007, his own MPs were baying for his blood. So it does seem to me that we live in an age where voters are very volatile, parties themselves are very volatile, and once your use-by date is seen to have passed, people want to get rid of you.
In terms of the kind of leader that the Conservatives might look ahead to next, when we consider that they're up against Sir Keir Starmer, who in many ways has defined himself, as Chris Mason was saying earlier, as everything that Boris Johnson isn't, what will they be looking to? What will be the kind of leadership qualities that will help the party turn the corner that it clearly needs to turn if it's going to be in a good position come the next election?
Well, I think they probably will want a rather steadier character than Boris Johnson. They will want someone who can get a grip on the organisation in 10 Downing Street, who does have some, I think, sense of a coherent agenda, even if that means someone who's a little bit more ideological than Boris Johnson. I think the problem for the Conservative Party going forward, however, is that what it takes to win a Conservative Party leadership contest, in other words, appealing to the base, if you like, is not necessarily what it takes to appeal to the rest of the country. And indeed, it might not even be what the economy needs right now. So they're really going to have to balance that. I think if they want to move back towards any kind of limits on public spending, for example, that may shatter the electoral coalition that Boris Johnson built in 2019. It wasn't just about getting Brexit done. It was about getting Brexit done so more could be spent in those left behind areas, some of which, of course, switched from Labour to the Conservatives. If they completely abandon that agenda for a smaller state, for tax cuts, for example, I'm not sure that they will be able to put that electoral coalition back together again in time for the 2023 or 24 election. But of course, there is the possibility, and I don't want to worry viewers with this, that whoever takes over calls a snap election. So hang on to your seats.
Just a final thought, if I may, Tim. You've gone through some qualities there that a new leader might want to bring in terms of the party's future prospects. As you survey the front benches and the back benches, who for you would be fitting some of those categories rather well? Are there certain individuals you think who are more promising as far as the party is concerned than others?
Well, I I don't think that Rishi Sunak's bridges are totally burned with the party, although his star has waned. I think if you look at someone like Sajid Javid, there's someone who has done a number of the top jobs in cabinet, probably more than most politicians I can remember, actually, and who has made a decent fist of most of them. I guess Liz Truss would probably be the one who appeals to the instincts of the party, at least at the grassroots and in some of the parliamentary party most. But it might decide, I think this is unlikely, but it might decide to go for a clean skin. So it might look at someone like Tom Tugendhat. But I think the transition from backbench to front bench is quite a difficult one to pull off. But who knows? He might make it.
As ever, Tim, good to talk to you. Thank you very much, Professor Tim Bale, the political scientist. Our thanks to him. You're watching BBC News. It is midday on Thursday, the 7th of July. We are live in Downing Street. Boris Johnson is to resign as Conservative Party leader later today. The party will elect a new leader who will take over eventually as Prime Minister. Boris Johnson wants to stay on until the autumn. Now, in the past few moments, Mr Johnson has appointed a full replacement cabinet, with Greg Clark becoming the new Levelling Up Secretary and Kilt Malthouse there becoming the Cabinet Office Minister, and James Cleverly is the latest Education Secretary. Comes after the new Chancellor told the Prime Minister to quit following a wave of resignations, mounting pressure from other senior Conservatives as well.
What's happened is ministers have seen, well, they've referred to a lack of honesty and integrity, and we clearly can't have that. And it's much better the PM goes now than dragging on to the Privileges Committee, potentially finding that he'd knowingly misled the House, because that would have been a disaster too.
So far, Buckingham Palace has declined to comment on whether Her Majesty the Queen has had any communication with Boris Johnson this morning. Yes, indeed. Good afternoon. Welcome to Westminster. Welcome to Downing Street here. We're outside number 10. We're expecting a statement from Boris Johnson anytime, really, in the next hour or so, because he's decided that he can no longer continue as leader of the Conservative Party. Lots of his colleagues have made it plain that he no longer enjoys their confidence. Lots of ministerial resignations yesterday and this morning. Those included the Northern Ireland Secretary, Brandon Lewis, and the Education Secretary, Michelle Donnellan, who'd only been in the post for just over a day. Mr Johnson let it be known he would be resigning as leader today. But, and it's a very big but, he plans to remain in post as Prime Minister until a successor is chosen, and that could go on until the autumn. And as we've been reflecting, that is the cause of a heated debate, not just within the Conservative Party, but in politics generally. Now, what we've had are dozens of ministers and ministerial aides stepping down over the past few days. They've been complaining about the Prime Minister's perceived lack of integrity, perceived lack of competence, perceived lack of honesty. And in the past 15 minutes or so, Boris Johnson has started to appoint replacements for those vacancies, those people who've left. James Cleverly has come in as Education Secretary. He's the third person to hold that post in 3 days. Just a sign of some of the political chaos that we've been seeing. And just to underline again, if you're joining us on this rather momentous day here in Downing Street, another handover of power, barely 3 years after Boris Johnson arrived here as the new Prime Minister, succeeding Theresa May. Well, in telling the world that he's resigning as Conservative Party leader today, he's serving as leader for less time than Mrs May did 3 years ago, between 2016 and 2019. So another fairly rapid changeover, except in this instance, of course, Mr Johnson is doing so barely 3 years, having won a very solid majority at Westminster at a general election. So we are expecting a statement from the Prime Minister at some point. There is no lectern in Downing Street yet, so we can say confidently that he's not about to come out. Having said that, we are expecting that it will be before long. Let's talk to our political editor, Chris Mason's with us. Well, we've been following quite a few comings and goings over the last few days, Chris, but today then we have a new cabinet in place.
We do, and just another new appointment made in the last couple of minutes. Sir Robert Buckland has been appointed as the Secretary of State for Wales, an MP in Swindon, but he is originally from South Wales, served as a lawyer in Swansea, I think, for a good number of years. He has accepted the call to return to government. He had previously been in government under Boris Johnson to serve in this interim capacity, as Boris Johnson hopes, over the next 3 months. As we've been reporting in the last few minutes, James Cleverly appointed as the Education Secretary for England. Kit Malthouse also reappointed into government, and we're seeing the same with some others as well. So more appointments to come, we expect. It wouldn't, on the face of it, look like a radical reshuffle of the cabinet pack, and it would seem, as things stand, that those cabinet ministers who had seen the Prime Minister yesterday and told him he should resign but hadn't themselves resigned, as things stand until we hear otherwise, they would appear to be willing to carry on in office. So the Prime Minister expected here shortly, within the hour. It wouldn't surprise me if in the next 10-15 minutes or so the lectern takes its position just a couple of metres behind us, and then we hear from the Prime Minister within the next hour or so, making the case, and it'll be fascinating to hear his language. Firstly, his reflections on his time as Prime Minister. What does he regard as his legacy? That'll be keenly contested, of course, by journalists, by the electorate and by historians. But how will he define his legacy? And then, crucially, how will he frame the argument that justifies in his own mind a desire to carry on as Prime Minister until October? Because crucially, Hugh, his parliamentary party have the capacity to remove him as Conservative leader. They've done that.
Yeah.
Removing him as Prime Minister is a different thing, because that is an appointment from the Queen. So you get into very tricky territory then. We can now report, Hugh, that we expect the Prime Minister to be here at the lectern at 12:30. So in around 20-25 minutes time. I just insert the caveat, though, that the expected time of this statement has moved several times already this morning, and it's entirely possible it will move again. I noticed that one of Boris Johnson's former colleagues on the Daily Telegraph said that if his capacity to keep to deadlines when he was writing columns is anything to go by, it might just have the capacity to slip a little.
Well, maybe he'll prove them wrong, so let's see. As you say, 20 minutes or so to wait for that statement. Viewers watching may well be asking themselves, and you can't blame them, OK, so Chris is telling us about new cabinet appointments from a Prime Minister who's telling us he's resigning, yes?
Yes.
And putting those two together is slightly bizarre.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Because, crucially, and it's the key thing to remember here, and it'll be why it'll be so important to listen to his words when he stands a few metres behind us shortly, is that he is resigning as Conservative Party leader. He is not resigning as Prime Minister, as we understand it from the briefing this morning. Once there is a vacancy for Conservative Party leader, there can be a Conservative leadership race, which we anticipate will start. It's pretty much underway already, with the time frame talked about this morning in there between the Prime Minister and Sir Graham Brady, the senior Conservative backbencher, who the kind of shop steward of Conservative backbenchers, happening over the period of the next 3 months. Constitutionally, we always have a Prime Minister. And so unless Boris Johnson were to tell us, and then tell Her Majesty the Queen, that he was standing down as Prime Minister, he will continue in that post until there is a new leader of a party that can command a majority at Westminster. Everything else being equal, that's the Conservatives. In other words, the next leader of the Conservative Party, who would then be the next Prime Minister.
Chris, we'll put some of those points to one of the Prime Minister's party colleagues, shall we? And that is Sir Bob Neill, who is the Conservative MP for Bromley and Chislehurst. Sir Bob is on the green outside the Houses of Parliament. Sir Bob, thanks very much for joining us. If the Prime Minister signals he's giving up as leader but not as Prime Minister until the autumn, what will your response be?
I think that's too long. We need to have the process much truncated from that, because I don't think it's satisfactory at the best of times to have these long handover periods. And I think the particular circumstances of the Prime Minister's departure in this instance mean that we should be looking either for the process to be speeded up to be finished before Parliament rises for the autumn or for the summer, or we should be looking to have an interim Prime Minister. I don't think it's right for him to stay on for any length of time.
So what will happen among you and your colleagues if the Prime Minister emerges here in 20 minutes and says, precisely as I've underlined, I am giving up as party leader, but I do intend, for continuity reasons and whatever else he might say, to stay until the autumn. What will you and colleagues then be doing?
Well, I've already started to make it clear, and I think a number of colleagues share this view, that Sir Graham Brady, who you heard earlier, the chairman of the 1922 committee, who's behaved very, very well in all of this, should be speaking urgently to the leadership of the National Conservative Convention, which is the voluntary end of the Conservative Party. Between them, they have it within their power to expedite the timetable for the election of a leader. It doesn't have to be set out as per the rules. They can agree to waive that in exceptional circumstances. I certainly think they should do so. The MPs should make their choice of the two candidates to go to the membership in the country next week. And we should move on. And I wonder if it's really sensible, even for the Prime Minister, hang on then. Should we perhaps have somebody like Dominic Raab, who is the Deputy Prime Minister after all, who stood in when he was in hospital, stepping up to the mark, has to serve as Prime Minister, because there must always be a Prime Minister. But that will be, I think, a neater and a less painful and drawn-out means of dealing with it.
What are your sorry, Bob? What are your people in Bromley and Chislehurst telling you?
Well, it was pretty clear, I'm afraid, even going back to the council elections in May, where we lost a number of seats, which we'd never lost before.
Thank you.
That was because of sadly, a breakdown of trust with the Prime Minister. These are people who have often supported him very strongly in the past, but that has changed, and it's because we need to rebuild that trust with the country that I took the view we needed a change of Prime Minister. And given all the important issues, grave issues the country faces, I think we need to make that change as soon as possible rather than hanging around.
I'm going to ask you the question, Bob, as I did earlier to some of your colleagues. Is there someone who you think fits the bill right now and is what the party needs?
I can think of up to half a dozen people who are capable of fitting the bill. And so I'm not on anyone's individual leadership campaign. I think of a number of people, both current ministers and people who are former ministers, and one or two who ought to be ministers, all of whom will be capable of stepping up to the mark.
What are the qualities that person will need to bring to the job so that you as Conservatives can go into the next election being able to say, if you like, that the Boris Johnson problems are well and truly behind you?
Well, I think the most important thing is somebody who can rebuild trust with the British public. That means someone who's going to be straight with them, and somebody who's going to level with them about the difficulties that we face, that doesn't obfuscate, and that is straightforward. Secondly, it's someone who rebuilds the government on a much broader base. We can't have a government where it's just those who have been the current Prime Minister's allies. We need to bring in talent from across the whole of the Conservative Party. And then thirdly, we have to have a relentless focus on efficiency and focus on government, actually lasering in on the things that really matter, the cost of living crisis, dealing with the energy costs, dealing with rising bills that people face. Concentrate on that. Scrape all the other extraneous matters off of the agenda, the barnacles off the boat, as sometimes the Prime Minister's advisor, Linton Crosby, has said. Just concentrate on the things that really matter. Those are the things.
We are live in Downing Street, Sir Bob, as you know, and you are live there on the green outside Parliament. It is 12:15, just about 13 minutes past 12, and we expect the Prime Minister to appear here in about 15 minutes' time. You've made your view very clear about whether or not he should stay on as Prime Minister, but let's talk about the message. What is the message that you'd like to hear from him? What does he need to say in this statement?
I think he needs to accept, frankly, that sadly things have gone wrong, that the position was untenable. I think there must be a tone of humility for what's gone wrong, and a recognition that for however long he stays, his job now is solely to ensure a smooth transition, and he should not attempt in any way to fetter or tie his successor's hands in the course that they take. So less bombast, just short, to the point, get the tone right, realise that sadly he's got things he can take credit for, and he's entitled to take credit for those. The vaccine rollout, the leadership in Ukraine, he wants to make sure that continues, but for the rest, keep it short, to the point, and then move on and let your successor in due course come in and have their own agenda.
We'll see if he's listening, Bob. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Pleasure.
Sir Bob Neill there, the Conservative MP for Bromley and Chislehurst. Our thanks to him for spending time with us and for being so clear about his view that the Prime Minister should not be staying in office until the autumn. Sir Bob was saying that he wants a truncated process to elect a new leader of the Conservative Party and therefore a new Prime Minister. That's a view that we've heard from others. But I have to say, we have spoken to other Conservative MPs as well who think the Prime Minister is perfectly entitled to make a case for continuity, having announced that he's leaving as Conservative leader, but to stay in office until a new person is elected. That debate is bubbling away, and it'll reach boiling point probably. The Conservative Party hears the message in about 15 minutes' time from the Prime Minister confirming that he does indeed to stay in office, intends to stay in office until the autumn, or at least the party conference season, end of September, beginning of October. That's the debate. Well, earlier we heard from the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, who's been describing his response to the events overnight and indeed the news today about the resignation of Boris Johnson, and insisting that in his view, and he would say this as Labour leader, the country, he says, needs a new start.
He needs to go completely. None of this nonsense about clinging on for a few months. He's inflicted lies, fraud and chaos in the country. And, you know, we're stuck with a government which isn't functioning in the middle of a cost of living crisis. And all of those that have been propping him up should be utterly ashamed of themselves. We've had 12 years of a stagnant economy, 12 years of broken public services, 12 years of empty promises. Enough is enough. And the change we need is not a change at the top of the Tory party. It's much more fundamental than that. We need a change of government and a fresh start for Britain.
It doesn't look like he'll get a general election if he just swaps leaders.
He needs to go. He can't cling on in this way. His own party have finally concluded that he's unfit to be Prime Minister. They can't now inflict him on the country for the next few months. It's obvious he's unfit to be Prime Minister. That's been blindingly obvious for a very, very long time. And if they don't get rid of him, then Labour will step up in the national interest and bring a vote of no confidence, because we can't go on with this Prime Minister clinging on for months and months to come.
Wouldn't that unite the Conservative Party?
I don't think anything is going to unite this Conservative Party. They're tearing each other apart. And what we've got in the middle of a cost of living crisis is a government that can't function. And that's why I say he can't cling on now. They've declared him unfit to be Prime Minister. They can't inflict him on the country for the next few months. If they don't get rid of him, we will bring that vote of no confidence in the national interest, because we can't go on with this broken government led by this discredited Prime Minister.
Boris Johnson, in some ways, was your biggest asset if you were going to go to the country. When you lose him, you will have more of a problem, won't you?
Look, the Conservative Party has been in power for 12 years. 12 years of a stagnant economy, 12 years of broken public services, 12 years of empty promises. We need a fresh start. And that's why I say changing the person at the top of the Conservative Party is not the fundamental change that we need. We need a change of government. We need a fresh start for our country.
But it doesn't look like you will get the general election you would want now, does it?
Well, we need the country's crying out for change. We've been stuck with a government that's not been functioning in the middle of a cost of living crisis. And now changing the person at the top of the Conservative Party is not going to make any difference whatsoever. People want change, a fresh start for Britain. And that means we need a change of government. We need a Labour government.
Is there nobody that you would rate as a good opponent? Someone will be in against you?
For me, this isn't a question about who leads the Conservative Party. It's much more fundamental than that. They've been in power for 12 years of empty promises, broken promises, a stagnant economy, wages very, very low, inflation and prices through the roof. We need fundamental change. We need a fresh start for Britain. We need a change of government. We need a Labour government.
Lastly, I just want to ask you, given what you say about the government, you haven't cut through as you might want to. How can you do something about that now?
We've come from a general election in 2019 where we did very badly, to local elections this year where we made considerable ground, and when a by-election win 2 weeks ago today in Wakefield with a huge swing to the Labour Party. So we're on track, and that's why we say the change we need is a change of government, a Labour government. We're ready for that.
Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader there, speaking to the BBC a short while ago. So we're live in Downing Street. We are awaiting the Prime Minister's statement in about 9-10 minutes' time, if it's on time. And here you have the helicopter shot above Whitehall, above the Treasury and the Foreign Office and Downing Street itself. And if you look there carefully in the centre of the screen, you can see the assembled ranks of the media, the world's media, and Chris Mason and I are among them, waiting for this statement. And there, just in the on the right of frame, we can see the garden at the back of number 10 Downing Street, and then at the top right-hand side, that's the edge of St James's Park. But Downing Street there, right running down the middle of the screen, and you can see the crowd of the media facing number 10 Downing Street. And then you can just see the street there. We've been joined by a lot of staff from number 11 Downing Street, who are just in the corner near the Chief Whip's residence there. And if we come live into Downing Street now, where Chris and I are standing, you'll be able to see the crowd who are assembling behind us, Chris, because the lectern is now making its way out. Let's take a look.
So here comes the lectern.
And there it is, being put in place in front of number 10 Downing Street, and with the staff out of number 11 Downing Street, looking on from the left-hand side, and just a few adjustments to make sure that it's right in the centre of frame and right in front of the door, and just a few adjustments on the microphone. So that's the confirmation, Chris, that we can expect the statement very soon.
Yes, that's right. So the lectern in place, being plugged in. I think within the next 10 minutes or so here we'll hear from the Prime Minister. And this is the moment of transition as a Prime Minister comes out and says that his departure is imminent from Downing Street. Just looking over my shoulder, beyond the shot that we're seeing on your screen right now, some of the most senior staff in Downing Street. I can see the head of Boris Johnson's policy unit, Andrew Griffith. He is a Conservative MP in Sussex. Amongst the throng of those for whom a big change is coming, and for many their future in Downing Street will not be a long one from here on in. And I always think that when you see these moments and the gathering of staff, you notice that it's a moment of history, that this is a point where a Prime Minister is going to come out and say just what, 2.5 years, a little over that, from him winning a big majority at a general election, that he is soon to stand by. And we await, crucially, Hugh, the exact words that Boris Johnson chooses, how he chooses to define his own legacy and how he chooses to justify his decision, both his decision to resign as Conservative leader, but also his decision to carry on as Prime Minister until the autumn.
It's that debate, isn't it, that we've been hearing during the morning, Chris, about whether he strikes a note of, I suppose, defiance and says, well, you know, I still have a job to do and I'm still carrying on, or whether he does actually manage to summon up some more humility, as one of his own colleagues called for earlier. There's the scene in Whitehall, big crowd having gathered outside the gates of Downing Street there, and we've had a bit of entertainment from the crowds already, with some music being played, as it is often on these big political occasions. And the crowd, of course, stretching down Whitehall and even across the road towards the location of the Ministry of Defence, which is not too far away. Everyone aware that it is one of those rare days when we have a changeover in government, where we have a new Prime Minister eventually going to be appointed possibly in the autumn, but as Chris was saying, that's part of the debate about this statement today.
Yeah, that's a very live debate, Hugh, this lunchtime. We've seen it playing out, haven't we, on BBC News in the last couple of hours, that there are Conservative MPs who simply do not think it is tenable for Boris Johnson to continue until the autumn. And we've seen in response to that, appointment after appointment, from the Cabinet to more junior positions. Andrew Stevenson, a former Transport Minister, appointed Minister without portfolio in the last couple of minutes. Boris Johnson determined to make the case that he can assemble a functioning interim government until the autumn.
So here you have a very good view of Downing Street with the flags flying above numbers 10 and 11 Downing Street, and then the Whip's quarters there over to the left. There you can see the decking and the terrace where we saw those controversial images of one of the gatherings during lockdown, and there were questions asked about what exactly was going on at that time, whether they were work gatherings or not. And then we can see the inner courtyards within Downing Street itself, and just a little sense for you of how slightly higgledy-piggledy the whole complex is. It's of course a Georgian complex initially, but now it's evolved into something with lots of different bits to the building, lots of little corridors going in and out, and then over towards Whitehall and the Cabinet Office on the other side. There you can see the ranks of the media on the right-hand side, and then into the forecourt there of the and the courtyard of the Foreign Office over on the right-hand side there, where we can see the cars parked. Nick Eardley, our political correspondent, has joined me as well. And Nick, it's one of those days where we sense that big things are about to happen. We're not quite sure in what terms the Prime Minister will actually introduce the notion of his own departure, and it's not just a question of tone, it's also a question in this case of precisely what his plans are and when precisely he thinks he'll be out of office.
And that's not completely in his hands, Hugh. So the expectation is the Prime Minister will say he's going to stand down as Tory leader to start an election contest. He would remain Prime Minister in the meantime. Firstly, there are a number of Conservatives, I've just been on the phone to some of them, saying they think it's untenable, the idea that he would stay in office for a few weeks or even a few months. Secondly, it's not up to him because the 1922 committee, that committee of backbenchers we've heard so much about in the last few days, they decide the timetable. They could decide on quite a quick timetable if they agree with those Tory MPs saying that this needs to be over and be over quickly.
Just some of the shouts going on here, just to explain to you that this is all to do with setting the lectern in exactly the right place in Downing Street, because lots of the photographers here understandably wanted put in exactly the right position. It's a great view we have, because we've got Horse Guards Parade and all the stands in place for the beating retreat and all the other ceremonial glories that are being played out on Horse Guards at this time of the year, and that is right at the right to the left-hand side and just behind the big wooded area of the Downing Street garden. And then we can see at the top of frame Whitehall itself with the cenotaph just down to the right-hand side and the tribute to the women at war on the left-hand side, and the big white building of the Ministry of Defence on the left and the Department of Health there on the right, just to give you a sense of some of the geography as we see this. Of course, lots of this, Nick, part of a ceremonial route, which the Prime Minister, an outgoing Prime Minister, is very familiar with, because of course it's that route to the palace to see Her Majesty if there is an opportunity at that point to exchange the seals of office. But that goes to the heart of today's debate about Boris Johnson's decision that, for all kinds of reasons that he may actually want to express in his statement, he feels that he should be allowed to stay on, which is why, of course, we've had these cabinet appointments today as well. So we'll see exactly how he wants to present that argument, not just to his own colleagues in the party, and not just to other parliamentary colleagues, but to the country, because this is a speech to a much wider audience than Conservative MPs.
Yes, absolutely, and I think part of what Boris Johnson will try and do over the next few minutes is to try and explain to the country what he thinks he's achieved, what he thinks he could still do in the next few weeks before he departs as Prime Minister. He's been a divisive politician. Boris Johnson has always been divisive. We're just watching now in the street, actually, his family coming out, senior ministers, his wife Carrie carrying one of their children coming out into Downing Street as well. On both sides, actually, where we're sitting, there are ministerial teams out to see the Prime Minister's final words.
Yes, let's come back into Downing Street and let's look at the crowd outside the number 11, because we have Carrie Johnson and we have little baby, and we have Nadine Dorries, who's of course one of the Prime Minister's most loyal and enthusiastic colleagues. So all of them, Nick, now here to witness what is for them surely a moment that they didn't think they'd be witnessing at this relatively early stage in a Prime Minister's career.
It's remarkable to think that it's only been 2.5 years since Boris Johnson won that incredible majority which gave him the chance